has their mic on, I would ask that you put it on mute. And it's great to see everyone here, and thank you particularly to members of the public who have joined us on this meeting tonight. Nyama, Warzel Woyang Gulin, Gunganinu Bik Wenor Darabandari, Nyariana Nyanga Bik Ban Ba Nyagu, Yagukan Nangit Bambuth Yalingu Ba Gamaji. I acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woiwurrung people on whose land Darebin stands. I recognise their continuing connection to land, water and culture, and I pay my respect to elders past, present and emerging. And if anyone with us tonight is on land that belongs to another First Nations peoples, I equally recognise and acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. We live in extraordinary times, and the health, safety and wellbeing of our community has and will always be paramount consideration of the Council. Council continues to be guided by the government directives and wants to be able to do the right thing for the health of our community during the COVID-19 pandemic. The COVID-19 Omnibus Emergency Measures Act 2020, passed by the Victorian Government on the 23rd of April 2020, included changes to the Local Government Act 2020, which allows Council to hold virtual meetings, and councillors can participate in meetings remotely by electronic means of communication. This meeting is being live streamed via a link on the Council website so that the public will be able to view the proceedings of the meeting. The meeting is also being recorded and will be made available on the Council website as soon as practicable after the meeting. We are being guided by a ministerial practice note on virtual meetings issued by the Minister for Local Government. Should technical problems be encountered by Council, the meeting may be adjourned until these are resolved to a maximum of 30 minutes. And if we cannot resolve the problem, we will reschedule or defer the items to the next Council meeting. In such circumstances, an advice message will be shown on your screen. Finally, whilst we have undertaken a number of our recent meetings virtually, we have done so with a small team of staff working with me to manage the process. Tonight, however, we will all be in different places, so I request that you acknowledge this and be patient if the process is a little slower. There are a few housekeeping matters and technical tips for councillors that I need to pass on. Please have your video on and mute your sound unless you wish to speak. I remind councillors that if you turn off your video, you will be marked as absent from the meeting for any period when your video is turned off. If you wish to electronically raise your hand, hover over the participants button in the main video window and then press the small hand symbol in the right hand bottom corner. Please use this if you wish to ask a question or leave the meeting, so I am aware of this. You can also just raise your hand, your actual hand, to get my attention. And once again, I remind councillors to raise their hand close to their face, not out to the side, because hands out to the side tend not to be visible to me. Note that there is no chat facility available during this meeting for councillors, submitters or general viewers. Before we commence, I would like to introduce the councillors and senior staff who are with us this evening and to confirm that councillors can see and hear each other. So I'm going to do that individually. You could all unmute yourself so we don't have to wait or get the delay. So Councillor Lasser.
Hello, everybody.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Hi.
Councillor McCarthy.
Good evening, everyone.
Councillor Greco.
Hi, everyone.
Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, I can hear everyone, but I'm not getting the shared screen function right at the moment.
We don't have a shared screen up at the moment, Councillor Lawrence.
Okay, so no worries.
I'll make it very explicit if there is a shared screen at any time, and I will ask. Councillor Messina.
Good evening, everybody.
Thank you, Councillor Newton.
Hi, everybody.
Thank you, and to the staff, Sue Wilkinson, the CEO. Thanks, Sue. Can you hear? Unmute yourself. And I'll get the GMs to unmute themselves because I'm going to introduce you. So, Sue.
Good evening.
Thank you. Ingrid Bishop, General Manager of Governance and Engagement.
Hi, councillors.
Sam Hewitt, General Manager of Operations and Capital.
Evening, Mayor Rennie and councillors.
Kerry McGrath, General Manager of Community.
Good evening, everyone.
and Rachel Olivier, General Manager of City Sustainability and Strategy.
Good evening, everyone.
Great. And I'd like to acknowledge that there are a number of other staff who are supporting us in the background, and I thank them all for their assistance. So let's get underway.
They're ready.
Yes.
Sorry to jump in there. From time to time, the volume of you coming through is very soft. So I'm not sure how we resolve this, but can we just make sure that you talk loud and directly at the computer so it's captured by your microphone?
Okay, thank you, Councillor Surf. And I've pulled my computer a little bit closer to me. I might even raise it up a little bit. Just give me 1 second. I think it's better to take the time to try and do this now and not. So if at any stage I'm drifting in and out, there must be something wrong with the computer, please let me know. We have apologies from Councillor Steph Amir tonight. Councillors, does anyone have a conflict of interest to declare? No, there are no conflicts. The first item then is confirmation of the minutes of the last ordinary council meeting. That's moved by Councillor Williams and seconded by Councillor Messina. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. In relation to the next item, that is question and submission time. We have received a number of questions and submissions. 7 people have submitted PQTs, and I will read out some of those, and 1 person has asked to be admitted to the meeting to read their question. We have also received 4 submissions on item 7.2, and one of those submitters will be reading out that submission, and I will read out the others. So before we begin with that, I would just like to remind everyone that notwithstanding that we're in the virtual space, this is still a public forum, and I have high expectations of everyone's behaviours in this space. At Darebin Council, we pride ourselves on being a progressive and contemporary council, and in the interests of demonstrating exemplary leadership, I have high expectations that we will all be professional in our conduct throughout the evening and respectful in our debate. It is important to remember that though we may be in the virtual space, we have an obligation to ensure that the working environment and public space forums are safe for everyone, both emotionally as well as physically. So I want to be clear that I will not tolerate any form of personal acrimony or insult, grandstanding or yelling, nor will I put up with talking over the top of one another or any use of unreasonable or impolite language or interjections. It is a big agenda tonight, so that I'll ask once again that you would direct all questions and comments through me as the chair, and I will endeavour to make sure everyone has an opportunity. We'll move now to question time. So the first question has been received by Frank van der Boom. Thank you, Mr. van der Boom, for your question. On behalf of many disgruntled residents, I would like to know what has become of the proposed green space at the end of my street, Adeline Street. It appears that my narrow, quiet street and Gertrude Street are to become thoroughfares to a railway car park. There are surely more appropriate and less disruptive and alternative entries on the west side. I have asked the LXRP for traffic reports with no reply. This whole venture is extremely poorly managed with total disregard to local residents. Thank you for this question and your interest also in this topic. Council is considering a report on this matter tonight, and I need to be careful not to preempt Council's decision in my response. I will therefore take your questions as a submission. You can watch online to hear Council's debate tonight. Many members of the local community have raised the issue of local streets around Belle Street, especially Gertrude, Adeline, Garnet and Esther Streets, and the issue of green space around Belle Station. Both of these issues will be considered by Council tonight. I do think it's important to let you know that removing the level crossings is a state government project. Council advocates for the best outcomes for our community, but Council isn't the decision maker in this case. Therefore, I would encourage you to continue to make your views known directly to the state government and the LXRP. Thank you once again for that question. The second question is from Ms. Serena O'Malley. It relates to Clements Reserve and 1 to 11 McMahon Road. Why was a 2018 council resolution to seek the transfer of land in Clements Reserve at 1 to 11 McMahon Road to the value of $140,000 not actioned see minute number 18/289 on the 15th of October 2018. Why did Council not receive a report about the future land at 1 to 11 McMahon Road as expected in the first quarter of 2020? See the response to my question to Council, item 5, on the 9th of November 2019. 3 parcels of land in Clements Reserve. And why has the combined valuation of the 3 parcels of Vic Road's land in Clements Reserve and the rear of 32 to 34 Clements Grove and 1 to 11 McMahon Road massively increased from $95,000 in 2015 to $1 to $2 million in 2020? And did this latest estimate take into consideration the position of the land on a floodplain, its environmental sensitivity, and any open space discount which is available via the state government? Thank you, Ms O'Malley, for the questions. On tonight's agenda, there is a notice of motion from Councillor McCarthy regarding Clements Reserve. In line with Council meeting governance rules, local law, a question may be disallowed if it relates to a notice of motion, a petition, or an urgent business item. This notice of motion, if supported, will see a report being presented to Council on this matter, and I am following up in respect to some other matters. I can assure you that Council officers did undertake some work, but you are correct that a report hadn't come back, and that may be an outcome from tonight. The next question is from Maddie Maitrey, and I'll read the question. Item 702, design, movement and delivery objectives for the Belle Pristina elevated rail corridor. Item 702 states Council's position that local streets are not negatively impacted by new traffic movements, including Adeline, Esther and Garnet Street near Belle Station. Question 1. Why was Gertrude Street, which is located between Adeline and Garnet Street, not included in this list? And will Council ensure that Gertrude Street is not negatively impacted by the new traffic movements by ensuring that Belle Station car park is not accessible via Gertrude Street? Thank you, Ms Maitrey, for this question and for your interest in the topic. Council is considering a report on this matter tonight, including the specific matters you are raising. I need to be careful not to preempt Council's decision in my response. I will therefore take your question as a submission. You can watch online to hear Council's debate tonight, but I do believe that the issue relating to Gertrude Street will be resolved satisfactorily. The next question is from Ms Jill Paulson, and Ms Paulson is going to join us to ask her question.
Yes. Hi, I just wanted to ask questions about the coronavirus, because I think that locally we can do a lot to try to prevent it, and all the stuff, the health stuff is very important. So my questions aren't sort of criticisms. I don't want to make criticisms. I just want to start a thing about what we can do in the council locally to stop the spread of coronavirus. Because if we don't do this and we don't get it right locally, then we're in big trouble. So I just asked a question that because Darebin covers a wide area, there seems to be only one spot where we can get tested for coronavirus, and you need a car for that. And I know you can do it through your doctors, but that's quite hard to do. So I wondered what the council was doing to talk to the state government to increase the number of testing stations or organise a mobile testing unit to go around, and especially to go around to workplaces and things. And I'm also asking about what the council can do to get the message out about face masks and keeping a safe distance, maybe in languages other than English, and to ensure everyone has a face mask, and yeah, what we can do locally, because we really need to set up things locally. And I just think this needs to be a standing order on all the meetings, because nothing will happen. Like, businesses won't be starting until we stop this virus.
Ms. Paulson, for your submission and question. And I really thank you for your, can you not hear me?
Yes, I can.
Okay. I really thank you for your interest in the community's health and wellbeing and for your commitment to raising this issue, because I think it is something that we obviously all care very deeply about at this time. Council has been working closely with the Department of Health and Human Services in providing facilities, resources and staff during the blitz testing of Reservoir when it was the target of a testing suburb. This included the 4 separate testing sites across Reservoir that allowed residents to walk to the site to be tested. The decision on the location of sites across Victoria is one that DHHS and the Council has expressed an interest in hosting further sites as requested. So we will follow up in relation to that. Council takes its role in educating the community on COVID-19 very seriously, and we have established an incident control team, including a full-time incident controller. With this, we support both residents and businesses in relaying state directions and ensure that council as a workplace also follows these directives. So you may be interested to know that almost all council staff are working off-site to ensure that we're also demonstrating that leadership and complying with directives. The directions from Stay at Home are that if you can work at home, you must work from home, and we are complying with these directions, and to have staff outside supermarkets would be a breach of these directives in relation to one of the particular questions that I think you raised. Council is active through online communications and is providing visual posters in commercial windows to ensure the public are aware of updated information. Council also communicates directly with businesses on restrictions, as often certain industry types are affected. Council will continue to work with authorities in ensuring government advice is adhered to, and the Department of Health and Human Services continue to target test high-risk areas. Council is currently supporting them in their response to the public housing towers in the municipality, and much later in our agenda there is an urgent item of business relating to that. I've been very impressed, Ms. Paulson, with the extent to which our community has rallied on this issue and is doing their very best. And I think it's people such as yourself who are at the forefront of reminding community members, because this is a collective effort, and we thank you for that. I'm also, it's such a huge topic and one which is very hard to do justice to in response tonight to your question. So I'm very happy to have our team follow up further with you tomorrow and actually go through some of the specifics of the actions that we're undertaking. So thank you once again for your question tonight.
Mayor Rennie, if I may, just state that there is an amendment that I'll be putting forward tonight that directly addresses Ms. Croak's point in regards to having more centres, testing centres in the city of Darebin.
Thank you.
Can I just say, I'm in Reservoir and they didn't actually do any testing in Reservoir. They came around and said they were going to do it, but it never actually happened.
I do know many people in Reservoir who were tested, so it's disappointing if it didn't reach you as much as it should, but I do know many people who were tested in Reservoir. So if that coverage was incomplete, that's disappointing to hear, but I'm sure that our staff will be able to follow up with you and provide you further information. So thank you, Ms. Paulson, for the question tonight. And you're welcome now to continue to watch the rest of the meeting, or if you prefer, you can jump off and watch the live stream now or at a later date. So thank you. Councillors, and I'll get you to turn off your camera too, Ms. Paulson. Thank you. The next question is from Ms. Paletti. Data has highlighted to Council a lack of councillor and community oversight of amendments and variations to approved planning process proposals. In the life of this council, greenwashing appears to have increased. Developers include sustainable features in development proposals in order to get council approval, and then subsequently apply for and receive approval for variations that remove green credentials such as solar panel power, roof and/or communal gardens and the like. Insulation has also been found to be inadequately installed in some developments. Variations are approved by council officers alone and do not come back to councillors, the community or objectors for oversight. Will Darebin Council release data on the number and detail of variations approved by the Planning Department in the last 4 years that remove or reduce green and sustainable features in any planning proposal? And when will Council review the planning process to increase councillor and community oversight of the amendment and variation process so that there is transparency and improved outcomes of development in Darebin? Thank you, Ms. Poletti, for the question. We've been advocating for a long time for stronger ESD requirements in both the state planning framework and the building code. Some of the issues you've raised, such as solar power, we think should be mandatory in developments, but they currently aren't. What we do, as well as requiring the highest standards possible, is invest significant effort in encouraging developers to go above and beyond and install high standards of ESD. We have an ESD policy in place, a specialist ESD officer and city designer. This level of investment focus is significant for a local government. If you are happy to raise these issues with the state government, we would certainly appreciate your support. In regards to your specific question, Council does not have the data you've requested, but our senior planning staff advise that it's not common for that sustainability features are subject to amendments. In 2019-20, the total number of planning applications and amendments we received was 1,085. Around 70% of these typically require advertising under state legislation. A further 175 secondary consents were issued and these were not advertised. Council doesn't set the advertising requirements for the amendment and variation process. This is set by the state government and cannot be changed by Council. Currently, the process set by the state requires advertising for any amendment that could be perceived as having or causing material detriment to any person. This advertising process is the same as planning applications. There is a process known as secondary consent, which allows Council to consider requests to change approved or endorsed plans. State legislation directs that these applications cannot be advertised. Requests typically include changes to floor layouts or changes to materials. I'd also say, with respect to your question, that if you have some specific examples that you're able to share with me, I'm very happy to follow up. The next question is from Mr. Chris Erlinson, and the question is, can Council reassure the community that all approved planning proposals will be completed as per agreed at public approval stage and not varied in favour of the developer to the detriment of the community, particularly where there is a loss of green and sustainable features? And can Council guarantee that the community that any approved plans for the redevelopment of the Preston Market site will not be greenwashed? Thank you, Chris, for this question. All planning proposals must be delivered in line with the approved plans unless an amendment or secondary consent is sought. State government legislation sets out the process that we run. The state government secondary consent process doesn't allow for public advertising. However, this is only allowed in cases where there is no detriment likely to be caused. All other changes must go through an amendment process, and about 70% of these include public advertising. There are a number of exceptions where the state government doesn't set out advertising as part of the process, for example, Vic Smart applications. As I mentioned earlier, we invest really significant effort in making sure that high standards of sustainability and open space are achieved within the limits of the state government framework, which we want strengthened. Council is advocating for the Victorian Planning Authority to include the highest ESD requirements in new planning controls for the Preston Market precinct to go above and beyond the scheme's current ESD policies. This will allow any future development applications, including any amendments, to be assessed against them. Council routinely seeks high compliance against ESD policies in the current scheme and will do the same with any future Preston Market application. Council cannot guarantee that developers will not challenge Council decisions or ESD conditions through VCAT. These procedures are set by the state government legislation and cannot be changed by Council. However, VCAT will also need to consider compliance with any ESD requirements of the scheme. I've got two questions from Mr. Nugent. Councillors, can you hear me? Okay, I'm going to read these two questions and then I'm going to actually take a brief pause or ask the CEO to read the first submission while I get a headset that might improve my sound. So just let me do these questions first and then we'll get there. The next question is from John Nugent. Mayor Rennie, could you please advise why you and Councillor Trent McCarthy did not declare a conflict or indirect conflict of interest when Council donated $350,000 to the Darebin Falcons, as they both have children at the club at the time? Mayor Rennie, could you please advise why Councillor Suzanne Newton did not declare a direct or indirect conflict with the Strathallan Golf Club, as she works for La Trobe University and the golf club is owned by the university? And Mayor Rennie, my question is about the domestic, there's a second question that's unrelated. So thank you, Mr. Nugent, for this question. The declaration of conflicts of interest in matters to council is the responsibility of individual councils to determine. I would point out it would be maybe helpful for you to read the guidelines on conflicts of interest. They do state, among other things, that if someone is part of a large group of people, that they don't have a conflict in deciding something. The next question from Mr. Nugent, and it is the final question that's been submitted, is the following. Mayor Rennie, my question is about the domestic wood fires in Darebin. If a neighbour complains to council about some smoke is coming in from his or her neighbour's fireplace, council will send a bylaw officer to investigate. From my reading of the bylaw, if the person doesn't fix or change the open fireplace, they could be fined. Mayor Rennie, can you give your personal undertaking as mayor of the city that no resident will be fined? No, Mr. Nugent, I cannot give that undertaking. It is not the role of councillors. That is strictly operational, and councillors are prohibited under the Act from being involved in matters relating to fines. Wood heaters are a legal form of heating in Darebin, but they also create local air pollution that is a problem in urban areas. If they are not operated or maintained correctly, they can cause a public health nuisance to surrounding neighbours. Residents have an obligation under state government legislation to avoid causing a nuisance. We expect people to operate and maintain their wood heaters properly. Many people quickly address problems when they realise it's affecting their neighbours. However, if people aren't prepared to do the right thing, we will take enforcement action. And I think that that is exactly what our community expects of us. That brings us to the end of the questions that are submitted. We have some submissions. Those relate to item 7.2, but I think it might be helpful to do those at this point in time. And I'm going to ask the CEO to start because I need a break and because some of their submissions are long, and also I'm going to get a headset to improve the quality of my sound. So Ms. Wilkinson, if you could read the first submission, which is from Mr. Bo Lee, that would be much appreciated.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, councillors. So yes, I have a submission from Mr. Bo Lee, who wants to make a submission in relation to item 7.2, which pertains to the level crossing removals at Belle, Preston. And the submission reads, thank you, Mayor and councillors, for the consideration of this submission. First of all, the council is to be congratulated for its advocacy work on the level crossings at Belle and Preston stations, which was first initiated in 2012 and will hopefully be completed by 2022, as noted in the report. Sadly, the same cannot be said for the LXRA and their ham-fisted approach towards community engagement and consultation. It was obvious to community members from day one that the LXRA intended on a predetermined course of action in relation to the project, and engagement and consultation were done as a tick box exercise. While the community had aspirations for more green space, encouraging walking and cycling, integrating different modes of transport and safer local streets, the same aspirations shared by council, they have been afterthoughts by the LXRA. First of all, the project proposes open space in the form of car parks and other uncovered impermeable surfaces. There was no consideration of planting of trees or landscaping, which has the added benefits of reducing the urban heat island effect in summer and reducing noise emanating from the station to nearby neighbouring streets and residents. Second, the movement of train commuters, pedestrians and cyclists are not apparent in the project design. It still assumes the majority of people access the train station via private vehicles. No apparent accommodation was made to integrate different modes of transport into the project design. Finally, the proposed use of Adeline and Gertrude streets as access to the proposed station car park will encourage rat running and decrease safety to local streets, in direct contravention of Darebin's stated policies on local streets. It was heartening to see Council's proposal to the design of the project, particularly in relation to open green space for community access and use, increasing integration of cycling and walking into the design, and the planting of vegetation. However, the issue of local street traffic movement and safety could be strengthened. In particular, it would be useful for Council to consider the potential benefits of closing off Railway Play East between Gertrude Street and Wars Avenue, and encourage motorists to use Oakover Road to access the proposed car park and thus maintain the safety of local residential streets. This idea has been discussed with the residents of the Belle Residents Group, consisting of over 100 residents in the affected area, and received favourable responses. Therefore, suggest the Council to amend the proposed report recommendation for the Council to receive a report on the possible closure of Railway Place East between Gertrude and War Avenue. I also suggest that Council's design objectives be shared with the federal member of Cooper, as well as the Minister for Transport Infrastructure and the Minister for Public Transport in the Victorian Parliament. Bo Lee. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. Can I confirm with the headset people can now hear me? Thank you. We're going to take the submissions out of order just so we break up. We've got a community member coming, Mr Mitch Wall, but before we move to that, I might do the submission from Kate DeCosta and Ewan Baker, and then Mitch will come back to you. And I might ask, in keeping with the fact that submissions are 2 minutes, even though they're being read by Ms Wilkinson or myself. So we might start the time clock again at 0 if we could, and this is the submission from Kate DeCosta and Ewan Baker. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for taking the time to read our submission. We have lived in Darebin for over 30 years. For half of that time, we have lived in Gertrude Street, Preston. It is a quiet local street with a heritage overlay to protect our 1920s war service homes. If you walked down Gertrude Street, you will usually see neighbours chatting over fences or crossing the street for a chat. It is a special kind of street where homegrown and home-cooked food is shared between homes, eyes are kept on houses where neighbours are away, and pets are fed and cared for. Children play in the street, scooters, bikes and skateboards. Older children look after the younger ones. Each year for the last 12 years, and with the kind support of Darebin Council, we have closed Gertrude Street to traffic for the annual Christmas street party. It is a truly inclusive and treasured community event out on our street, enjoyed by young and elderly alike. The event has created and strengthened neighbourly relationships. People are drawn to it, and over the years, the spirit of the street party has grown to include our neighbourhood friends, including Adeline, Garnet and Esther Streets. We understand that there are many decisions to be made and competing interests to be balanced when undertaking a large project such as the level crossing removals. We understand the need for modern infrastructure and amenities, and of course improvements are welcome. However, we understand that with the Belle Street level crossing removal, it is proposed that our Gertrude Street and neighbouring Adeline Street, our treasured local streets, will be opened up to be used as access to permanent parking for the car park at Belle Station. This news is devastating to our community. It changes everything for our little nook in the worst way. Gertrude and Adeline Streets have true community spirit and connectedness. This can't be represented by numbers or in traffic projections. We will lose it and the street party if our streets are used to access a car park. In the document entitled Preston Reconnected to Design, Movement and Delivery Objectives for the Belle-Preston Elevated Rail Corridor, please include Gertrude Street, Preston as a local street, not to be negatively impacted by new traffic movements. And please, please do not allow the train station car park to be accessed by our local streets. Ewan Barker and Kate DeCosta. Thank you for that submission. We'll now go to the submission by Mr. Mitch Wall, and I know that Mitch is with us online. He'll join us now. Mitch, thank you for joining us tonight. We really value your participation and you have 2 minutes.
Good evening. Thank you, everyone. I make this submission on behalf of the Belle Residents Group, and I thank some of our other members for submitting questions and submissions tonight. The Belle Residents Group is an active and vocal group that has grown to now represent over 200 households between Thornbury Station and Bruce Street in Preston. We welcome the design, movement and delivery objectives of Council's Preston Reconnected paper, subject to a number of submissions, a number of revisions, I apologise. These recommendations were submitted to Council earlier today and broadly relate to 3 things. protecting local streets from being access points to a new car park for Belle Station. These include Esther, Adeline, Gertrude and Garnet Streets. Number 2, locating the new Belle Station car park on the western side of the rail line with access from Belle Street via Blanche Street. And number 3, drawing attention to Victrac land marked between Shower Street and Blanche Street, currently labelled as future use to be determined in an LXRP plan that was privately released to the Preston Open Space Advisory Panel. As a group, we believe that government are planning on selling off this land to developers for future development. In LXRP's most recent consultation, 47% of all responses over the entire Preston level crossing removal project area were focused on the 600-metre section of the project between Oakover Street to Belle Street, and what the open space features were requested by the community in this space. On LXRP's privately released plans, there is currently no open space features in the Oakover to Belle section of this project. On every engagement occasion, our community has clearly spoken. The Oakover to Belle section of the project is experienced the most acute intensification and is where the community needs a substantial park to help offset the population boom. More than anything else, the Belle Residents Group would like to see a substantial community open space in the Oakover to Belle section of the project. The Belle Residents Group would like to thank the council for their willingness to engage without concerns about the projects. As locals, we know the area best and the legacy will be ours. The level crossing removals presents a huge opportunity to enhance. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Wall. We have another submission on this item as well, and that's from Ms. Tara Prowse. Dear Darrimon Council, I'm a resident in the Belle Station area of Preston and have lived in the area for almost 15 years. I have become increasingly dismayed over the last few months and now have serious concerns about the LXRP plans for the proposed raised train line and the impacts it will have on surrounding areas. Despite community feedback to all levels of government, including Council, Kat Theophanous, Jed Carney, and specifically through the LXRP consultations, that this area deeply values the community we are creating, the quiet streets that facilitate this, and is in desperate need of increased community accessible green space due to the large amounts of dense development in the area. There have been no plans for this in any of the updates received by the LXRP. My submission today urges Darrimon Council to advocate emphatically for good outcomes for the area, as this is a once-in-a-generation infrastructure project that will radically transform the way that we live together. Thus far, the local community will get the impression that LXRP are not taking community safety into consideration. If this was the case, then their proposal would not include turning local streets into thoroughfares, making these areas less safe for children, cyclists and community use, especially as there is an easy and obvious alternative, which is to concentrate the car park access via Belle Street, thus having less impact on residential streets, as these streets have no single story and street facing dwellings. When you have no local green space, the streets become critical for community life. They become the way that neighbours get to know each other and support each other, especially during the pandemic. These streets have literally been a lifeline for so many isolated residents during the last few months, as they have provided safe, quiet and socially distant space for people to talk and for children to play outside. The proposal by LXRP completely disregards this and everything that we have spent so long building in this community. Christmas street gatherings, neighbours who deliver food, mow each other's lawns, give out toilet paper and masks, and probably most importantly, a generation of children who love their neighbourhood. This connection extends to both the nearby apartment blocks as well as the single-storey houses, and efforts have been made by longer-term residents to welcome new arrivals into the area. By their very nature, quiet streets where car traffic is deprioritised breed community. This will be destroyed by turning these streets into car park access and a thoroughfare for vehicles. I won't read the rest of the submission, but it talks about resilient Melbourne and the need for green spaces as a response to the climate emergency, and discusses the Preston Reconnected objectives. So thank you, Ms. Tara Prowse, for that submission. It's very much valued, and I hope that the debate tonight and the decision made by Council is of interest to you and satisfies some of your concerns in relation to Council's position. Councillors, that brings us to an end of the submissions that have been received. So we'll now move to petitions. There are none that I'm aware of. not seeing any indication there are petitions. And so that brings us to consideration of reports. I will remind councillors of the normal process, which is that we will hear from officers or have an opportunity to ask questions of officers on each report before I then call for a motion. Please don't present a motion to me until I have actually called for a motion, and we'll start with questions. So the first report is in relation to NARC and the concept design stage. If I could get the relevant officers to put themselves on. So we've got Ms. Kerry McGrath and Ms. Felicity Lay and Mr. Andrew George. Councillors, does anyone have any questions in relation to this report? Councillor McCarthy?
Mayor, if we could just get a little bit of information from the officers in relation to how community feedback, particularly in relation to outdoor facilities for children and particularly toddlers, has been incorporated into the design brief.
Ms. McGrath?
So through you, Merony, I might pass that to my colleague, Ms. Lay, to answer that question. And you're on mute. Good.
Yep.
Thank you. Good evening, councillors. Thank you for the question. So all the feedback has been passed on to our design team who are working on the project, and in particular in relation to the outdoor area and the outdoor play space. What we're working towards is the provision of what's called recreation leisure water, or sometimes referred to as splash pad. It's a place where which will replace the outdoor toddler pool area at the moment, that will be slightly larger in size than the existing outdoor toddler pool, but will have a much greater amenity, I think, to provide to the users of the facility, that will allow a space for community to cool down and seek relief on hot days, to play in a nature-based environment, to have zoned areas so that different age groups can have different appropriate play areas, but also importantly to create spaces where parents can sit with their children, not only to watch over their children, but to connect with other residents as well, so that the resulting outcome is similar but greater in size to the existing toddler pool, but also a much more beautiful and engaging space, and one in terms of a nature-based play space being in keeping with the aim that we have for the project, being a 6-star Green Star rated facility as well.
Thank you, Ms. Lay. Councillors, are there any further questions? I'll now ask if
Mayor, sorry to interrupt you, but I just need to say that I went offline as a result of my computer shutting down on me unexpectedly. Unfortunately, the officers were able to reconnect me. So I just want that to be noted, that I didn't leave my computer as a result of me leaving the room, but as a result of the computer shutting down on me.
Thank you, Councillor Greco, so noted, and I'm sorry that happened, but equally pleased that you've been able to resolve that fairly quickly before we move into debate. Councillors, is there a motion in relation to 7.1?
Yes, Mayor, I'm happy to move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy, and is there a seconder? Councillor Lassurf. Thank you. Councillor McCarthy, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and a big thank you, first of all, to our officers for the work that's gone into preparing this report and the consultation that's gotten us to this stage. But particularly also a very special thanks to the community members who have responded overwhelmingly positive. And I just would highlight the statistic that's included in the report, which is quite profound, in fact, in context of council consultations, having seen these for almost 12 years, to see a figure of 81% of survey respondents stating that they recommend between good and excellent the designs, and of course, just as significantly, 95% of respondents stating that they strongly support council's aim to achieve a 6-star Green Star rating through the ESD initiatives proposed. I wanted to highlight those 2 points, and for councillors, we'd be well aware of this, but for me, what's really significant about the report we have in front of us and the concept design stage that we are now in, which is really about moving us ahead to this next part of the process, is to be able to demonstrate that over 400 people have been involved in this consultation. They've gotten on the Your Say part of the website. They've looked at what's proposed. We know that the Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre urgently needs to be rebuilt, and needs to be rebuilt in line with the principles that our community knows are also important, and which is why almost 100% of people actually coming out and supporting the sustainability measures included, which includes working towards having a facility that actually does not rely on gas wherever possible, and in fact is an electric facility in line with the highest performance standards that you can achieve for an aquatic centre, is quite profound. And to have that endorsement of 4 out of 5 people giving their thumbs up to what's recommended or what's proposed is quite extraordinary. So I just want to say a huge thank you to all the community members that have contributed. I also want to highlight that by no means has this been a case of taking out a draft concept and saying, well, that's the concept and live with it. In fact, there's been some very specific changes that have been made as a result of that feedback. And Ms. Lay highlighted one of those, which of course is some rethinking around the outdoor spaces, particularly those that are specifically available for both toddlers, young children and parents. Reflecting on my own experience as a parent and attending the Northcote Aquatic Centre when my kids were a lot younger, that was actually effectively like a gathering place for families to connect and overcome the isolation. And we know once we're all no longer housebound, we'll really need these facilities for people to reconnect. So Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre is part of that. And I'm just so impressed by the community support for what's proposed. And I'd like to thank everyone for their contribution and endorse the report as listed.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Surf. Councillor Lawrence, unless there's a technical problem we have to be aware of, we've got a seconder. Was there something I need to deal with now? You're on mute, Councillor Lawrence. So Councillor Lawrence, I might go to Councillor Surf to second talk to that, and I'll come back to you because you're still on mute. So Councillor Surf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie, and thank you, Councillor McCarthy.
I just had a small question, procedural question.
We might hear from the seconder because we've got a motion in front of us.
Yes.
So Councillor Surf, start the clock again.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie, and thank you to Councillor McCarthy, who has summed up this report quite nicely. As was mentioned tonight, we are noting the findings of the community consultation for the proposed concept design that has been out with the community recently, and as Councillor McCarthy said, has had an overwhelming response from the community with over 400 submissions received. It is really, I guess, an exciting step to get to this point. It is something that we have been talking about for the past 4 years in terms of the redevelopment of the Northcote Aquatic and Recreation Centre. We all know it is very tired and in much need of redevelopment, and it is at a point where it needs to be fully redeveloped. And so it's really, I guess, an exciting opportunity for our community to let us know and let them shape what the new design of the pool and its facilities will look like. In terms of, Councillor McCarthy has obviously covered off, as we've heard, the sustainability credentials of the concept design with the 6-star Green Star, and I'm really happy that we're headed down that path. In terms of some of the other feedback that we received, there was overwhelming feedback about the need for a multi-purpose area or an area that could be used for a variety of different things, whether that be for community groups to meet and swim clubs to get ready for their races. And we've been able to, I guess, incorporate some of that into the design. There's been lots of mention of safe travel to and from the facility, and it's something that we would like to encourage. As Councillor McCarthy's covered off, the outdoor area and the indoor aquatics, particularly for the younger younger swimmers and how the configuration of that will be. There was obviously
10
disappointment
seconds.
expressed by the community in terms of what seemed to be a smaller outdoor area, but hopefully we've been able to incorporate and adjust into the final design.
That's time. Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Councillor Lawrence, you need to take yourself off mute again, Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I just wanted to raise a error of mine tonight. I didn't have the petitions with me in the bedroom, so I had to get them. But I did have a number of petitions for tabling, and I wasn't sure what procedure that would follow.
Councillor Lawrence, you may have missed the boat. I'll just seek some clarity from the CEO, but if they're not tabled tonight, it might have to wait for the next
These are petitions I raised in the last special meeting, and I was prevented from tabling them at that time.
So, Councillor Lawrence, thank you. Ms Wilkinson, are we able to go backwards or?
Through you, Mayor, given that my view is that we can, but not in the middle of an item that's currently being debated. So I think it's something that we do at the end of the evening. You can revisit it then.
Okay, thank you. I'm happy to follow that advice. So I'll put that on the agenda for after urgent business. We'll come back to 6 petitions. Councillor Lawrence and Councillor, you wish to speak to the item? Because we're speaking to the item.
Wish to move an amendment to the item.
Thank you.
Mayor Rennie, before we move on to the amendments, may I ask a question, because I was disconnected and I didn't get an opportunity to ask a question. So I ask you for your indulgence to ask a question in relation to this item.
I'm reluctant, Councillor Greco, because we were still in questions at the time you rejoined, but on the grounds that you were disconnected, I don't want you to be at a disadvantage. So you may ask one brief question. Go ahead.
Okay, look, the question was because of when I got disconnected. The question is that given the feedback that we have received from the community, I just wanted to get an understanding whether this would add to the cost, to the overall cost of the development, of the redevelopment of the pool. That is, will it add to the $63.5 million that we've set aside, if you like, for the redevelopment of the pool?
Councillor Greco, I would like to draw your attention to point 2 in the recommendation, where it specifically says changes made as a result of community consultation will be done, so ensuring that the project is delivered within budget. So that's a very specific point, which I believe answers your question quite explicitly, and that's point 2 of the recommendation. Thank you. Councillor Lawrence, you had an amendment?
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I had a small amendment, just an added point, that council note the following community feedback requesting an audit of the NARC project, namely 577 residents online petition, 244 paper petition.
So, Councillor Lawrence, do you have that in writing?
Yeah, well, I've got it in physical writing here.
You'll need to submit that in writing. I did send an email to all councillors earlier stating that amendments must be received in writing because we're in an online space. So what I'll do is while debate is going on...
I've been having some difficulty for the last 5 days getting both a phone and an internet connection. It's taken council all those days, and we only just got that at the last minute.
So, Councillor Lawrence, you might like to use your time now to try and put that amendment in writing, because it was made quite clear that because we're online, amendments needed to be submitted in writing. I'll ask if there are any other speakers to this item. Councillor Messina.
I'm not a speaker to the item, but I just wanted to do. We discussed Councillor Lawrence's amendment later on. I'll wait for that then. I'll wait for Councillor Lawrence's amendment.
In order for Councillor Lawrence's amendment to be accepted, it will have to be submitted in writing. So are there any further speakers to this item? Councillor Newton.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So it's been wonderful to get so much feedback about this pool. This is somewhere where I was swimming in between lockdowns, and the staff did a fantastic job with making sure that people went in at one time and got out. But I think we all know that this is quite a tired facility. So to see the plans that we've got coming up and to see the feedback has been fantastic. I know that personally I was a little bit worried about the open space in terms of that there was a toddler pool there currently, and we're now talking about different open spaces. But thankfully, I'm feeling more confident about it after hearing or seeing that we've actually currently got a toddler pool that is 110 square metres, and the proposed outdoor nature play splash deck will be about 150 square metres. So I really hope that going forward, the staff and the designers can make sure that we've got enough space for parents and children outside. But overall, I'm very excited to see this develop and go from here. So very happy to support this.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Are there any further speakers? There are no further speakers. Councillor Lawrence, do you have your amendment in writing for council business now? If not, I'll put the matter to the vote. Councillor Lawrence, you're on mute. You really need to...
Now, Mayor, I'd request that you give me at least 30 seconds to do that.
Councillor Williams, did you wish to speak to the motion?
I still have, yes, please. I still have concerns regarding NARC and whether we're at the right place in time to actually do such a massive development like this at this point, considering we are going through a pandemic. We've had a number of residents, particularly in Reservoir, that are concerned that use Reservoir Leisure Centre, that are saying, why are they not being looked at? And also, why isn't Reservoir being taken care of also? I think we've got two beautiful assets in the city of Darebin, and I believe that we can be doing actually more regarding Reservoir. I'm not saying I don't want Northcote to go ahead, because I do, but I think that I don't know if we are in the right space and time to be doing that, considering we're in a pandemic crisis.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers?
I'm just going to send it now.
There are no further speakers.
Okay, I'll send it now to who?
Everyone.
Susan, Rennie, and Ingrid, Bishop, Stephen, Mark.
Councillor Lawrence, if you do EMT and councillors, it goes to everyone. And
I'm not. My phone has been taken away from me, so I can't do.
So, Councillor Lawrence, you've been provided with support this afternoon, and you've sent multiple amendments to other items. So I'm not accepting. Anyway,
I'm sending it now from a private phone that doesn't have you all online. So I'll try and do it, but I'll ask you that I have asked for 5 days for a phone that works.
Councillor Lawrence, you've been provided. I know for a fact that you've been provided with.
No, that's you. You're insinuating. Well, that tech support hasn't been able to give a phone that works. I've now just sent it through as best I could off a private phone, and this is what I've been putting up with since the special meeting. I have not been given technical support.
Councillors, I'm hoping that people have received that amendment. It is that council note the community feedback requesting an audit of the NARC project from 577 residents online. Is that accepted by the mover and the seconder?
No.
No. Councillor Lawrence, that hasn't been accepted. Is there a seconder for the amendment? That's seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence, you have 3 minutes.
I have a question, Mayor Rennie. Am I able to ask questions?
On the amendment.
On the amendment, yes.
On the amendment before we begin debate, yes, Councillor Messina.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, the question is to Councillor Lawrence. I'm a bit confused at what he means by audit.
No, you can't, Councillor Messina. You can ask a question of officers. You can't ask a question of a councillor.
Okay, through you, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to ask the officers, is there in general an audit report? I'm assuming that Councillor Lawrence is referring to a accounting audit, or I don't know if he's referring to a risk and management audit. Is he referring to an RHNS audit? So I'm a bit confused. So through you, Mayor Rennie, through to the officers, could you kindly ask, is there generally an audit that is undertaken when there is an asset such as this site, and what audit process and what audit reporting is undertaken? And is that something that goes to the audit committee anyway?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Messina. Ms. Lay?
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor Rennie, there's it may be a matter of language, but there is not an audit per se, or one that I would have anticipated go to the audit committee unless the audit committee requests one. There are a number of checks and safety checks and balances in the project methodology that we are employing, given the size and the nature of the project. That includes the governance structures that we have around that. That includes a risk assessment that we did commencing the project that we keep coming back to. That includes using project management assistance to support us with the project. It will be included in any procurement methodology that we have. I think that will be particularly important and during the construction methodology. So it is embedded within the project. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Lawrence.
Just to answer that question.
No, Councillor Lawrence, the clock started, so we'll turn on the clock and you've got your 3 minutes.
The Auditor General, the petitions refer to. So perhaps that needs to be spelt out.
Councillor Lawrence, start speaking.
Yes, sorry for the technical problems, but they've been plaguing me since before the special council meeting in terms of both laptop and phone, and I still haven't been restored with a phone yet. This amendment I'm making is just so that we actually have our eyes and ears listening to all members of the community and consider note these feedbacks from the community. They're quite significant. 577 people signed one online petition. There's another online petition of a couple of hundred. And there's actually paper petitions of 167 that have already been tabled in previous meetings. There's an extra 19 to be tabled now. I believe Councillor Williams has a couple of hundred of petitions to also be tabled regarding this issue. And all of those petitions, there's 4 or 5 different formats around the community, are requesting an Auditor General audit of why a 4-pool proposal, which has been completed recently, something similar for 38 million, has exploded to a $63 million proposal. And I think we shouldn't ignore over 1,000 residents who've queried the size and scale of this cost blowout. And it is a cost blowout. We, as councillors, were not made aware of it until the 22nd of February. Then the community was made aware of it in PR through the Herald Sun. I don't think that was acceptable, both to councillors or to the community. I know we're in a time of a pandemic, and it is good, certainly, to inject capital works into the city. But if our projects blow out by 25 or 28 million, then that is a lot of community infrastructure that is foregone. And that is not good governance. It's not the kind of responsibility of the community. So we've had this loud and clear in mailed back petitions, in tabled petitions, on online petitions, and I don't think we should ignore that question in this item, even though this item is simply an item to note community feedback and note the progress on the project. I think we're getting a wake-up call from our community, and we
Thank you.
shouldn't
That's
try
time.
and manufacture consent when consent isn't there.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Greco.
Mayor Reddy, I reserve my right to speak. Thank you.
Are there any further speakers? No, there are no further speakers. Councillor Greco, would you like to speak?
Yes, Mayor Reddy. I'd just like to make a few points. I think it's what Councillor Lawrence is proposing is a worthy amendment, given that, as has been mentioned, that there are so many petitioners that are concerned about the cost associated with the redevelopment of NARC, and I think it's only prudent for us to look at getting something of a project of this size audited, so that we can ensure that the public monies, which is ratepayers' money, is being properly spent. This is particularly so at the moment, councillors, given that we are going through the COVID crisis, and where the community is looking at council and other levels of government with a lot more attention in terms of how money is spent, and that we ensure that the money is being properly spent. The other point that I would make, councillors, I've been on council nearly 12 years, and this is the first time that I've seen a project of this enormity of $63.5 million. And whilst I've got all trust and faith in our officers in terms of the internal processes that they've built into it, I think it's only wise for us to ensure that external eyes have a look at our project, and to ensure that what we are doing in terms of its cost is appropriate to what we're spending. Final point that I'll make, councillors, is that $63.5 million, councillors, represents half of the council's annual rate intake. That is quite a significant amount of spend, and we have to show that we have put in place robust processes to ensure that that spending is appropriate.
That's time. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Yes, as I was saying earlier, that in reference to the amount that's been spent, or that we're going to be putting tonight, is $63.5 million, or up to that value, which on the 8 years that I've been on council, this is the biggest amount that we've ever put on in council budgets. I think it's quite, it's not really reassuring, as I was saying, because we are in a pandemic crisis. It's a large amount. We have two wonderful assets in the community, and we're not looking at the whole of the community at the moment and the whole of the city of Darebin. We're only looking at one area, which is the south of Belle Street. And I think it's really important that we need to maybe hold off until we know what's going on with this pandemic, and then we can consider such budget items as this, as $63.5 million. We could have put more money towards other items in our budget from last week regarding shovel ready jobs, but putting all our eggs in one basket in one aquatic centre, I think is a little bit smoking dreams at the moment, from my perspective.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Councillor Messina.
I sat back and have listened to the debate, and there's a couple of things. First of all, I want to address Councillor Lawrence's amendment, then I'll address some of the things that have been said. I think I have to recognise that at $63.5 million, it is a large amount, but we need to look at when Northcote Pool was built. It was built in 1968. It's almost as old as I am. And I would love to have a refurbishment myself, but we're talking about the Northcote Aquatic Pool, and it's the worst pool I've seen in many municipalities. It needs a refurbishment, and it needs it now. It's either no pool or it doesn't get done. The Reservoir Leisure Activity, Reservoir Leisure Centre is a different. Can I just finish what I'm saying?
So, no, Councillor Messina, Councillor Lawrence has raised a point of order, so I'll hear the point of order. Councillor Lawrence.
I may be mistaken, but we're simply debating whether we add in that we note community feedback here. We're not debating the substantive item yet, are we?
No.
Can I just say, no, that's not correct.
So,
We're
sorry.
actually debating your amendment.
So we are debating Council Alliance's amendment. We're not debating the motion.
So my point of order is relevance. So we're not talking about doing or not doing the project. We're talking about whether we listen to our whole community.
Stop, Councillor Messina, stop. Council Alliance, stop. Okay, there has been a point of order. You must be silent and you must allow me to make a ruling on the point of order. Okay, you are not debating this with each other. I get to decide. Okay, Council Alliance has suggested that Councillor Messina has strayed from debating the amendment. Okay, I just remind councillors to have the amendment in front of them when they're speaking to it. I think that will help everybody be sure that they are speaking to the amendment. With that reminder having been made, Councillor Messina, I'll ask that you make sure you can see the amendment and that you speak to the amendment. There will be an opportunity to speak to the motion and we'll keep going from there. Thank you, Councillor Messina.
I actually did say I had 2 points to the amendment, and my second point, which is I didn't give it wasn't allowed the time to say because I keep constantly getting intrusive and interrupted by Councillor Lawrence meeting by meeting. Anyway, my point is that I wanted to discuss an audit, and an audit I would think would be relevant to this particular project. But I didn't get a chance to say that. But I think we need to have a look at it just in summary. But I also need to identify a couple of things. If requesting an audit for the purpose of a tick box for any council elections is used in that way, then I would strongly suggest we don't go this route. But I'm happy to say let's have an audit, whether it's just a summary about what takes place during the construction. But with the construction. But I do think
10 seconds, Councillor Messina.
I'll stop.
Thank you. Councillor Lassurf.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie, and I'm speaking against this amendment, mainly due to a process issue more than anything. If there are petitions that have been signed by people in the community, then there is a process for us to consider those petitions. I understand Councillor Lawrence said that there were a petition of this nature tabled at the last meeting, which I actually wasn't at, and I had a quick look at the minutes and couldn't see the relevant petition. But if the community is concerned and there are petitions, and the petitions should be tabled and then they can be dealt with in the right way with a report coming back to councillors about how we would address those concerns. So for that reason, I can't support this amendment. I would also note that I guess in terms of being able to consider an amendment like this, I don't even know what the petitions say. I haven't seen the petitions, so I don't actually know what I'm noting except for what has been said within the debate. So at this stage, I cannot support this amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I won't cover over the points that Councillor Lassurf has made. I actually haven't seen the amendment, and we do have a local law that we do need to follow, so which does require us to provide amendments in advance and in writing. What I would say, though, is that in addition to the points that Councillor Lassurf pointed out, which is that we do have a process for petitions to be heard, we also do have a whole range of business processes in relation to looking at any project, doing the due diligence. There are a whole range of elements in there. What concerns me about the proposed amendments that I've heard verbally from Councillor Lawrence tonight is this implication that in some way that those sorts of things wouldn't be looked at. And I actually find it a bit concerning that a councillor would put forward an amendment of that nature because we know as councillors the depth through which these projects are.
Point of order.
What's the point of order, Councillor Lawrence?
The point of order is that Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Lassurf.
Sorry, Councillor Lassurf finished speaking over a minute ago, so I think you better contain yourself. Yes,
but the assertion that there's some implications from noting petitions, I will say...
Councillor Lawrence, if you have a point of order, you have to refer quite specifically to the government's local law.
My point of order is that the statements from Councillor McCarthy seem to imply
No,
malfeasance
Councillor Lawrence, your point of order must relate to a specific point in the governance local law.
My point of order is it's misleading to make statements about what
so all
is
you have to say
by a motion. The motion is written there.
Okay,
the petitions,
stop, Councillor Lawrence,
petitions
stop. Councillor Lawrence, stop.
Okay.
Okay. All you have to say if you wish to raise a point of order is that you're raising a point of order in accordance with clause 53(1)(h), which is a misleading or false statement. I'll then ask that you actually repeat the statement verbatim that you find misleading or false. I believe that what you've actually done is just express disagreement with what Councillor McCarthy has stated. And I note that clause 53(2) says rising to express a difference of opinion or contradict a speaker is not grounds for raising a point of order. That's actually what you've done. There is no point of order. Councillor McCarthy, please keep going.
Madam Mayor, it's misleading to say these petitions haven't been tabled. They have. I've got notes and
Councillor Lawrence, Councillor
Lawrence. So that's been expressed by two councillors.
Councillor Lawrence, you're now interrupting.
I move a dissent in the chair.
Councillor Lawrence, there's no provision to move a dissent in the chair.
On your ruling.
Dissent in the chair. I haven't made a ruling because there is no point of order. A dissent in the chair can only be raised if there's a valid point of order. There is no valid point of order.
So lies are permitted in this meeting.
If I may make a point of order.
No.
Mayor Rennie, if I may
Councillor Greco, no, you may not at the moment. You're just interrupting. Okay, I plan to deal with this issue first. Okay.
Mayor Rennie, could I just seek a clarification in relation to the statement that you've just made? Because what you are saying, Mayor Rennie, is that because you don't consider it to be a relevant point of order, therefore you are not making a determination. In fact, you are making a determination by saying that you don't think it is a relevant point.
So, Councillor Greco, you're now arguing with me. Okay, I refer everyone, anyone wishing to make a point of order should have the governance local law in front of them. Number one. Okay, the clause at point 53.
I do have it in front of me. I do have it in front of me. And Mayor Rennie, you are hiding behind that clause. And what you are doing is misinterpreting the point of order. Let me
Councillor Greco.
Let me finish.
No, I'm not letting you finish because you're interrupting the flow of the meeting. So Councillor Greco, please.
So let me finish.
No, Councillor Greco, I'm the chairperson. Yeah, you are interrupting. Councillor Greco, please place yourself on mute.
Biased in the way that you are chairing.
Councillor Greco,
and I will not point that out.
Councillor Greco, you have repeatedly made assertions of my bias. They have not
here's
been
another
backed
example
up.
of it, Mayor Rennie,
well,
and I'm just drawing it to your attention so that
Councillor
you can correct your
please
behaviour.
put yourself on mute. Okay. Section 12 of the Governance Local Law deals with points of order. The section is entitled Valid Points of Order, not just points of order generally. Any councillor wishing to raise a point of order has to be absolutely certain that what they're raising relates specifically to those points of order and is valid. This clause of points of order has been used and abused in this council too often. It has extended meeting times out for hours unnecessarily, and it is being used precisely where councillors wish to debate with their colleagues and express differences of opinion or where they don't like something that's said. It is not a point of order if you don't like something that's said. So please be much more judicious in your application of points of order. And I'll now invite Councillor McCarthy with no further interruption to continue. Councillor McCarthy, you have another minute.
Thank you, Mayor. Look, there's a whole lot of things that aren't clear here. When we talk about an audit, we have an audit committee. The audit committee actually has the ability to look at anything within council. That's part of its remit. It has its standard elements, but it can also call things up. So the process here, and I'm not clear on what sort of audit the amendment that Councillor Lawrence has put forward actually refers to. However, if Councillor Lawrence wishes for this project to be looked at by the audit committee, there's a simple process for that. There's also a simple process for putting forward petitions to be considered by council. What we're looking at tonight, and this is why I consider that the amendment that Councillor Lawrence has put is inappropriate and not relevant to the report, is that this is about community feedback on the concept design. It's not about processes of whether it's about due diligence, which seems to be Councillor Lawrence's concern, if I'm correct in understanding the line of argument. I'm actually not clear exactly on what the issue is. And so on that basis, and having not even seen the amendment, I'm inclined to not support it.
That's time. Thank you. Are there any further speakers to the amendment? Okay, I now put the amendment to the vote.
We have the amendment up on screen so that people
Yep.
can see it. Yep, thank you.
Here it is. So have a good look, councillors, because when we actually get to the vote, I'm going to request that that come down so that I can see all hands. So if all councillors can just take a few seconds to have a read. Okay, we'll now take that down so that I can see hands. All those in favour of the amendment, raise your hand. And against? That amendment is lost. We had councillors Williams, Lawrence and Greco voting in favour of the amendment and councillors Lassurf, Rennie, Messina, Newton and McCarthy voting against. Thank you. We'll now return to debate on the motion in front of us. Councillors, before we begin that debate, I'm going to be absolutely strict. I did send an email earlier stating that amendments must be submitted in writing. I refer specifically to clause 41 of the governance local law, which makes it clear that that is a requirement. I think even more so now that we're in the online space, it is not reasonable to expect people to get their head around ideas that come up. So please be mindful of that. I will not accept further amendments if they are not emailed to all members beforehand. So we've heard from the mover, Councillor McCarthy, and the seconder, Councillor Lassurf. Are there further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes. Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Yes, now to get to speak to the substance of the motion, which is in fact to note community feedback conducted by the council, which we should note. And even it is limited in a virus period, we should note that feedback. It's regrettable that we weren't also listening to the other petitions, particularly the one in paper 167 was tabled on the 15th of the 5th, and there was some other petitions tabled on the 29th of the 6th. So, and I believe a resident, while I was observing, I was not on attendance, presented one of the online petitions, and all these petitions requested an Auditor General report into such a massive expansion of this project in terms of dollars. So let's be quite clear, that's, I wasn't able to table some of those earlier. I've been told I will be able to table some. But there's over 1,000 residents who are asking us to be more accountable with rates in this project. There's no doubt I've swum at both centres about the merits of developing both centres. One centre has a 25-metre pool and a 50-metre pool and very terrible dressing rooms. The other one lacks a 50-metre pool. There's obviously service gaps in both pools. But if you blow all your money on one pool, you need to be able to answer back to the community. And my problem with this motion, where it only notes what will make us feel good and make us confirm what was decided, I imagine, by I don't know who.
That's time, Councillor Lawrence.
February.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I'd like to make a couple of comments in relation to this. Whilst I value the community feedback that we have received in relation to such a large project, and it only makes sense to actually hear as much as possible as we can from the community in terms of what they want to see in a redevelopment of a new NARC centre. So I welcome the feedback that we have heard. Also, I welcome to see the petitions that we have received in regards to concerns in relation to the amount that is going to be spent, and that we offer greater transparency and accountability in regards to from here on in relation to us actually spending that money and ensuring that we develop the pool according to proper processes and procedures. The other thing that I'd like to note, Mayor Reddy, is that whilst it's great that the Northcote Aquatic Centre will be redeveloped, and like as many people have said, it looks very tired looking centre. I also say that the Reservoir Leisure Centre is an extremely tired looking centre, and that and I'm hoping that in the near future we'll be able to dedicate the same level of attention to redeveloping the Reservoir Leisure Centre, because it needs redevelopment as much as the Northcote pool needs redevelopment. And so on the basis of that, I think that whilst I acknowledge the feedback that we have received, I would like us also to acknowledge the petitions that we have received, and also, and it's a shame that we haven't been able to.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. That's time. Thank you. Councillor Messina.
I'd like to address both things that have been discussed in this chamber this evening. The first thing is, as I mentioned, Reservoir, the Northcote Aquatic Centre is just as old as I am, and it is old, run down, and needs a major reconstruction. We don't know what we're going to find there. There's a lot of clay that's been associated with the Northcote Thornbury area, so hence why there's a contingency in the report, number one. Number two, generally speaking, it is the council's role to ensure that the maintenance of its assets are maintained over the time. That the Northcote Aquatic Centre, and may I add, would be the responsibility of prior councils to ensure that it was maintained. It was not. And let me tell you that this term of councillors did get inconsistent maintenance on most of their assets, and this council has brought most of their assets up to speed. So the depreciation of most of our assets have been severely not looked at in the past. Secondly, the Reservoir Leisure Centre, which comes into this debate all the time, has had some works undertaken in the past couple of years, and there will be more works attended to it in that particular time. Now, what we've got in front of us are petitions that I have not seen, petitions that state, will you require an audit? Well, guess what? Who's going to say no to an audit? Of course they're going to say yes if you require it, if you require an audit. So I guess it depends on how petitions are worded, based on saying I have 677 petitions that need to be tabled, because people do have been asked a question. Did they ask the right questions is my question, because we haven't seen those petitions. So secondly, I'd like to say that this is a 6-star building. We are getting a state-of-the-art facility. It'll stimulate jobs. It'll be a stimulus, economic stimulation of jobs. It'll be for people of the municipality as a whole. Only 50% of respondents to the community consultation.
That's time, Councillor Messina.
And Northcote.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there any further speakers? No, there is a right of reply for the mover. That was Councillor McCarthy. Do you wish to exercise your right of reply?
Thank you, Mayor. I will. Yep.
You've got 2 minutes.
Thanks, Mayor. Well, thank you to all contributors to this debate. There are a number of statements which I think are problematic, and I will address those because I think they provide a misleading context. The choice before us here is not about whether or not we go ahead with the Northcote Aquatic Centre redevelopment or not. That decision has been made. It's also not a decision between whether we do Northcote or Reservoir, and I'm frankly finding this debate really problematic. Council, in fact, has both projects on its books. It has both projects in its schedule. The reason why Council is not undertaking a more detailed piece of work around what needs to happen at Reservoir is because councillors in the November meeting last year, councillors for the Latrobe Ward, councillors Lawrence and Greco, put forward a proposal which was unanimously supported by Council to do a detailed study into looking at the redevelopment of the Reservoir Leisure Centre from a health and wellness perspective and from the social and economic potential there. And all councillors supported that, which has actually resulted in a report coming to Council, and in effect is actually delaying the works that many of us know could happen in the future at Reservoir, but we're not sure what that looks like because of that request for that report. In contrast, Northcote Aquatic Centre and Recreation Centre is well past its use by date. It is incredibly clear to anyone that goes there and knows the facility, and I know that a number of councillors have used the facility or have visited it, and the community knows this deeply too. is tired, it desperately needs work, it is failing in some parts, and it needs to be rebuilt. That's what's here in front of us. What we have in front of us is a report, and we must show respect to the incredible community response. Over 400 people that responded, 324 rated the proposed design. 80% of people rated the proposed design between good and excellent. A significant number, about 380, approved of the ESD initiatives.
That's time, Councillor McCarthy. Thank you, councillors, for that debate. We'll just get the motion up briefly so that you can have a look at it, and then we'll vote. So you can all see the motion that we're voting on now. I'll ask that all those in favour raise their hand. And against? So we've got Councillor Lesurf, Rennie, Greco, McCarthy, Newton and Messina voting in favour, Councillor Williams voting against, and Councillor Lawrence abstained. Thank you, councillors. That motion is carried. That brings us to item 7.2 on the agenda. Councillor Messina, we're going to do questions first, noting that you have sent through an alternate amendment, which may be where you're going, but let's start with questions of the officers. And Ms Olivia is here with Ms Haynes to answer questions. Councillor Lawrence, you have a question?
Susan.
I haven't received the amendment.
It's been emailed to all councillors, Councillor Lawrence, so we're not actually at that point yet, but you might like to use this question time to actually check your emails. Councillors, are there any questions? Councillor Messina.
Thank you. To you, Mayor Rennie. My question relates to an amendment that I'm going to put in place, but I'd like to know, I want to know how long would it take for the a report looking at the possibility of the closure of Railway Place East between Gertrude Street and War Avenue. So my question is to the officers, how long would that take for that particular report?
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Ms Olivier.
Through you, Mayor Rennie, look, certainly we could give preliminary advice in about 3 months.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Look, I had a question just in relation to, we're suggesting in the principles that we would promote local employment and local businesses. And I was just wondering how would that be implemented? I know it's not up to us to implement that, but is the motion worded in such a way that it will enable something like that to actually take place rather than just being a rhetorical statement that we make?
Thank you. Ms Olivier.
Mayor, I might ask Ms Haynes to respond in the first instance.
Yep, through you, Mayor Rennie. So we have established an employment working group with the LXRP where we're working through the detail of this, but what we would be seeking is to actually include clauses into the contract between the LXRP and the Delivery Alliance who actually deliver on the project. So it would become an actual clause within that contract.
It's just a supplementary question, if I may, Mayor Rennie. Could we get an example of what those supplementary clauses would actually look like?
Thank you. Ms Haynes.
So I'm not entirely sure whether or not I'm being asked to provide an example of a legal clause to a contract in order to send it through, or just an example of the kind of detail that would be included. But if it is about just what kinds of things would be included, then
yeah, the latter. What kind of things would be included? Yep.
So specific activities that would be needed to be taken place, like that might mean the way that local businesses are informed of opportunities, or what types of businesses are invited to apply for opportunities, or there might also be targets within it, that kind of define what the LXRP is seeking, what the state government is seeking in entering into the contract in terms of percentages of certain target groups employed, that kind of thing.
Thank you. Councillor Messina?
Oh, nothing. I've got.
No, yeah, a question. Okay. Are there any further questions, councillors? Ms. Olivier?
Mayor, I need to at some point advise the meeting that officers have updated their recommendation today, and that's been circulated to councillors. Is now a good time for me to explain that? Would you want to do that slightly later?
No, now would be a very good time. Thank you, Ms. Olivier.
Okay. So I can see that the screen is being shared now. So just to explain the update to council officers' recommendation, essentially we are recommending 2 changes to Appendix A, which is the list of objectives we're suggesting that council might consider endorsing. The first is to add the word Gertrude, which has the effect of listing Gertrude Street along with the other streets in that area. That was certainly our intention, and that essentially makes that very explicit. The second one is to add an additional objective to the list that reads, target employment and supply chain opportunities towards economically disadvantaged groups, specifically the called community, women, young people and Darebin residents impacted by COVID-19.
Thank you for that explanation, Ms. Olivier. Councillors, are there any questions in relation to that alternative recommendation by the officers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Just if I could get a response from, I suppose, officers or yourself. This new green amended words referring to Gertrude Street, does that go any way to address the issues of green space and community issues raised by former councillor Belle in the submission tonight?
Councillor Lawrence, I believe it responds to a number of the submissions that made note of the fact Gertrude Street had been left out. It doesn't answer every element, and I think Councillor Messina has another amendment. Many of those things are actually already included in the officer recommendation. Ms. Olivia, do you want to add anything there?
Essentially, it just has a very, that specific change, Councillor Lawrence, has a very specific effect of adding Gertrude Street to that objective. There are other objectives that deal with green space and open space in Appendix A.
Thank you. Are there any further questions? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, Melody, I just had a question. Look, I haven't seen this practice before where the officers actually amend the motion right at the last minute. I just want to get a bit more background of why the recommendation has been amended in the last few hours.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Ms. Wilkinson.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. In fact, Council, I'll ask Ms. Haynes or Ms. Olivier to answer the substance of the question, but to go to the first point, Councillor Greco. In fact, last week, officers submitted an updated, it's actually called an amended recommendation. So the officers have amended their recommendation and that is provided for within the governance local law. So it's not an updated recommendation, which is what I think is actually the phrasing that was used. So it's an amended officer recommendation, and it's not common and shouldn't be common, but there are provisions for that to occur.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. Ms. Olivier.
So in regards to the substance of the matter, essentially both of these are elements of officers' advice to council, and our very sort of clear view is that they should be explicit. And we've had some questions about the intent of the report, and since it's been made public, and our view is that it's really valuable to make those elements explicit. Actually, it's not a change in our advice, it's about making sure that that's very clear to everyone reading it.
Thank you. Councillors, are there any further questions? No. Is there a motion? Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Through you, Mayor Rennie. I had circulated a motion earlier this evening, so I wonder if we could have that on the screen.
Sure. Thank you, Councillor Messina. We'll just get that up. And Councillor McCarthy, are you indicating willingness to second that? Thank you.
It is fairly extensive. It is a fairly extensive.
So, councillors, this has been emailed around, but I'll just give you a short amount of time to read those additional points. And because this differs from the officer recommendation, I'll also invite any questions from councillors who are unclear of the meaning of any of the amended parts of the motion.
Can we please scroll up and down, please, to you, Mayor Rennie? I just need to make sure that it is, because there were some amendments to and fro today. So I'd like to also address if Jed Carney's been mentioned in the point number 3.
It's actually my amendment, Lena.
Yes, it is. Yes, I wanted to ensure that.
Yeah, but that's my amendment that I'd like to put in.
Okay, all right. Can we go down to the end?
So receives a report on the possibility of closure of railway place. Okay.
Thank
Councillor Messina, thank you for confirming.
Yes, thank you.
That is the case. And Councillor McCarthy, thank you for seconding. Do any councillors have questions in relation to this amendment? Councillor Lawrence?
I just have a question, which might be an additional amendment. Just in point 3, we address lower house state members and the federal member. This is an important project. Wouldn't we also communicate with the 5 upper house members, state members?
So thank you. We'll just hold that thought because it's not actually a question in relation to what is in the amendment, which is what I'm dealing with at the moment. Are there any questions in relation to what is in Councillor Messina's amendment or the effect of the amendment? No, there don't appear to be. So we will deal firstly rather with Councillor Messina's, it's not an amendment, I stand corrected, it is Councillor Messina's motion. You've all now seen that motion. There are no further questions in relation to that motion, so we'll now debate the motion. Councillor Lawrence, I think you flagged what could be an amendment, but noting Councillor Williams has already actually suggested an amendment in relation to who's communicated with. We'll hear from the mover and the seconder, and then Councillor Williams will come across to you because you circulated a possible amendment earlier, which I think probably...
before 12 o'clock today.
Yeah, I've no doubt the mover and seconder will be able to agree to that. But let's just go first to the mover, Councillor Messina, and then we'll hear from Councillor McCarthy after that. Councillor Messina.
Thank you. Our role as officers, as councillors, is to facilitate, advocate and deliver the best outcomes. And we need to be agile and responsive to the challenges at our community. Hence my amendment, which I believe will deliver the best outcome for Preston. It'll be the best intergenerational project, the best to ensure that the heartbeat of the Preston continues, ensuring that the lens of multiculturalism, the Indigenous and the arts and the employment opportunities for urban residents, and ensures connectivity and community safety are at the forefront. I want to acknowledge the extraordinary work undertaken from Sunny and Paul and Rachel, not only during this council term, but prior, and a special mention to past councillor Bo Lee for his vision, and to the past officers, Stephen Hamilton. And let's not forget that it was that council's initiative that the feasibility on the removal of the 4 level crossings. I'm sorry, Mayor Rennie, I need to stop the clock. There's some interference in the background because it's quite disturbing and I don't know what that is.
You're talking about the crackly sound?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. It's disturbing. Yeah, sorry.
Councillor Messina, I'm not sure whether that's just a glitch with the internet. We may not be able to do very much about it.
Okay, all right, thank you. Okay, I just want to make a special to the members of the Belle Residents Group, to the William Street residents, to the stakeholder groups and the visitors of Preston, to the 5,259 website views, to the submission of 547 ideas, and a collective thank you in acknowledging for your ongoing passion and commitment to your neighbourhood. This is a magic wand for this project, and if I was able to twitch my nose and say abracadabra, it is a must-have, and these items are not negotiable. Preston deserves these outcomes, and the amendments are reflective of our rich multicultural and Indigenous history. The aim for this is total connectivity between the Darebin Arts and Entertainment Centre, Ray Bradman Gardens, the railway corridor, the Preston City Oval, the railway station, the bus service. We don't want to hold up on Murray Road, and most importantly, both day and night are designed for women, children, and gender diverse in mind. We must avoid and ensure that local streets are not impacted by the new traffic movements, including Adeline, Gertrude, Garner, and Esther Streets near Belle Station. Any increase in the movements of the side streets will not be adequate for a safe environment for our community, especially the young children that live in those streets. Our advocacy, in short, is about improving public transport connectivity, including integration for cyclists, safer and welcoming for all, design pocket parks design, not just one, but many, many pocket parks. Open space, in fact, 2.5 soccer grounds, a rewilding corridor, and most importantly, it's recognising our rich cultural diversity. And I've also included utilising the back fences of residents to highlight and capture the connectivity of art and ensure that the art and the multiculturalism is seen through our architecture, our spaces, and our connectivity from Preston right through to High Street, incorporating hopefully some advocacy to the owners of the Preston market. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Messina, and I can assure you that your sounded okay from my end, so I hope it improved for you. Councillor McCarthy.
Mayor, I'll reserve my right for the moment.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? Just take yourself off mute, Councillor Williams. Thank you.
Am I able to do my amendment?
Yes, you can.
Yep, I put it through earlier today before 12 o'clock to under the recommendation in regarding we're writing to local ministers. Can we ensure that Jed Carney is also included in that?
Certainly, that's up on the screen now. Is that
her office is on the corner of Adeline and High Street there, so she's hugely impacted, and I think having her left off that amendment.
So thank you, Councillor Ms. Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to the governance team, I'm wondering if they could please take that amendment and apply it to the motion that's actually being debated at the moment. So that's Councillor Messina's motion, not the original motion, so that councillors can see the context, please.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. That's a good point. The amendment is fairly clear in intent. Councillor Messina, is it acceptable to you and to Councillor McCarthy? Yes, so thank you, Councillor Williams. We'll note that Jed Carney will be included in all correspondence as per your amendment that's been incorporated. Are there any further speakers to the motion? Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Lawrence, you're on mute. That's better. No, you've double tapped it. And again, just tap it once. Okay. Yep.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd still like to move an amendment in point 3 of the substantive motion, or the amalgamated motion, that we also write to all 5 Upper Northern Metro MPs, one of which offices across Belle Street.
Yeah, we know who they are. Now, I had asked that all amendments be put in writing. I believe that's so simple and easily achieved that we might be able to deal with it. Is it acceptable to the mover and the seconder? Councillor Lawrence, notwithstanding the fact that you haven't submitted that in writing, it's easily understood and accepted by the mover and seconder, so we'll make sure that's incorporated into the motion. That's now part of the motion. Would anyone else like to speak to the motion?
Like to seek to speak.
Certainly. Councillor Lawrence, go ahead. You've got 2 minutes.
Yes, look, I'm very happy to speak to this motion. I did just want to double check that the consultation we did with 100 or so, over 100 residents, has properly been reflected in the final officer report. And so I'm glad to see that amendment come through. It's a very big vision, 4 hectares of open space in the heart of Preston, which was formerly an industrial zone. There is a small amount of residents, as we know, along Adeline and Gertrude Street, but fundamentally this renewal area, the junction area, was one of high density and large factories and dominated by leatherworks, including Standard and Howe Leather Factory. So one of the hangovers of the Junction Street project is that the redevelopment as a residential area has unfortunately followed the same path as the Docklands. And we've ended up with a number of buildings with inflammable materials used. We've ended up with not enough shelter along the road. So there's not shelter from sun or from windswept. So it's windswept, and then it's also lacking in green space. I think this is an example, the whole junction area, of a pre-COVID-19 approach to planning. And we are now confronting the fact that these type of high density areas lack many things. So 4 hectares of open space sounds ambitious, and that's why I'm very keen that we include everyone, we lobby all parties about such an ambitious project.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thanks, Marini. Marini, I have 2 amendments that I'd like to put. One amendment has been circulated already, and it's the amendment in relation to point 1, adding extending point 1 with a statement.
Councillor Greco will just hopefully get that up on screen.
I note that it's been put as point 2, which I'm happy with, and just let me read it to ensure that it captures everything that I have said.
Now, I'll just note that councillors look only at the red, because this amendment would be applied to Councillor Messina's motion. It wouldn't be applied to the officer recommendation, because we're debating Councillor Messina's motion. I'll ask the mover and seconder. Yes, Councillor Messina.
My question is in relation to the current reference group. Are there not traders or any business owners in that particular group?
Thank you for the question, Councillor Messina, and we'll pass to Ms Haynes for that one, I think, or Ms Olivier.
Through you, Marini, the existing reference group that the LXRP is running relates only to public open space. It's quite a small group. I don't believe it has any specific local business interest as part of that.
Thank you for that response. So I'll go to the Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Messina. Do you accept the amendment? Yes. Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Messina and Councillor McCarthy, is the mover and seconder, have accepted the amendment, so that's now part of the motion.
Thank you, Marini, and thanks the mover and the seconder. I have a second amendment that I'd like to put. And again, unfortunately, I don't have this in writing because it came from an answer that was provided by one of our officers, and it reads like this.
Councillor Greco, I was very, very explicit about the need to circulate amendments in writing. Are you able to circulate it whilst debate is occurring?
Oh, look, it's only 7 or 8 words, so
Okay.
I can. And this follows on from the point in relation to, I think it's point 1B, and so the sentence that will follow that will be this should be reflected in LXRP contractual arrangements.
So, Councillor Greco, hang on, I just have to. I'm not sure if councillors understand.
So if you go to point 1B, which is the green section, that includes the officers' additional points that they've put in. And at the end of point 1B, that's it. Exactly right.
Okay, thank you for that. Councillors, this is why we try and do things in writing beforehand, because it does make it harder for people. Councillor Messina and Councillor McCarthy, do you accept the amendment? Councillor Greco, that's been accepted by the mover and the seconder. We'll now continue with the debate. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Reddy. Yeah, I'd just like to make a couple of points in relation to this. Firstly, I'd like to say this is probably the biggest project that's hit the city of Darebin in the last couple of decades, for what I can remember. We're talking about a $500 million project. And as it's been also noted by other councillors, a lot of the work to get this sort of project up came from the previous council in putting forward a package of not removing one rail crossing, but removing 4 rail crossings, and the economies of scale that came with that. We were able to convince the state government in regards to that, and now we're getting right to the business end of things, where this is actually going to be an actuality, which is great to see. And it's great to see that the council took that initiative to present that vision to the state government. Also, this project will forever change the spine of Darebin, particularly around the Preston area. And it's sort of things that you see only in a lifetime, really. And so that's great to see. In relation to the 2 motions that I put, the first motion about establishing a reference group, this was a big sore point in Reservoir when we got the Reservoir overpass done. That the traders, some went basically, didn't go broke, but I tell you what, they got close to it, particularly on the back of a number of things that were occurring in that area. So it's important that this project, that we set up a reference group, that we listen to the traders, both the traders of Preston Market and the traders of High Street, because the impact, particularly on the market, is going to be enormous because of such a project. So it's essential that a reference group is set up. The other point is also, it's reinforcing the idea of local employment and local business chain, is that we need to see that in contractual arrangements. If it's not in a contractual arrangement by Alex RP, then it's not worth the air that we dedicate to such an important initiative of creating local jobs. So I'm glad that those 2 amendments have been accepted and that the motion passes tonight.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Williams.
Thank you. It's really important that we do have a reference group put in place in situations like this. We have once in a lifetime, maybe once every 100, 150 years, that a railway station actually gets upgraded. We are so blessed and lucky to actually have such a huge strip that's getting updated. The reason being is that we have so many stations that are extremely close together, and it was not feasible to have a train station that's elevated up here and then coming down at this level, because they're so short together compared to other areas of Dandenong where their train stations are a lot further apart. So that was the whole reason why that council, or Darebin Council, is one of the lucky ones to actually get a major strip of quite a few areas that will be looked at and redone. The reference group is exceptionally important because it will continue to make sure that the configuration, that what happens and occurs in this particular area is done in the right way for the community. I think the community are the best knowledgeable people who know their area better than LXRP. So I think it's really important to have that dialogue keep continually open. They would also be up to date regarding accessibility, safety, cycling, and obviously for walking, and to ensuring that those with disabilities will always be connected to an easier way of getting to and from transport, whether it's getting on and off at the train station or to the local bus. I think that's pretty much about it. So I very much welcome it, and I look forward to it. As I said, this council's been working on this particular project for, I'd say, close to 8 years now. So it's really to see the vision, and then now seeing the actual progression that where it's come to today is quite exciting. It's also very important that the cost involved, that it's not coming out of council's back pocket, but yet we see the vision and what we can see for the future that's to come. So it'll be there for another 150 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there further speakers? There are none, so put that. Oh, Councillor McCarthy, you reserved your right. Yep.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, I just wanted to just round it out.
Mayor Rennie, may I point out there was no speakers against, so
No,
I'm not.
Councillor Greco, there's no need to point anything out. Councillor McCarthy had reserved his right. He actually has not
I'm
spoken.
sorry, I apologise. I thought he was speaking yet. Not a problem.
Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. Getting used to being interrupted as we go. I just wanted to start off by thanking Councillor Messina for her initiative. All of the amendments that have been put forward respond to very specific issues that councillors have heard. And in particular, I'd also like to echo the sentiments of thanking those residents that actually joined us tonight under very difficult conditions. And I can only imagine how stressful it's been, not only with obviously having the depot at the end of the street and having the works that normally take place, but also to have what has been, I think, unfortunately, a real dismissal of their concerns by the LXRP. I hold out hope, though, that the strong position that council is putting forward tonight, which really says that this is a project that came from this council and came from this community. And I think we need to recognise Councillor Belle, who put this on the table, was the first person to raise it in the chamber, as far as I know, anywhere within the political circles, and really made it an issue for our community. And that's why we're talking about this tonight, not because it was the brainchild of any political party or anyone else, but Councillor Belle put it forward. And staying true to that concept and that idea of removing this dangerous level crossing and transforming that space along that entire corridor for the benefit of the local community who have been locked away and are prevented from accessing the green space at Ray Bradman Gardens, and in fact having more green space along the corridor. We must hold true to that, and we must fight hard for that. So the amendments tonight, both those from the officers and also from Councillor Messina, go a long way to making that case very, very clear. The other thing I think it's worth mentioning is that if it wasn't for council and if it wasn't for Councillors Belle and others, we would not be talking about this. The state government wouldn't be talking about this. So I ask the MPs to intervene in this process at the moment.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. We'll now put that to the vote. We'll just get it up on the screen. So noting that that is the amendment moved by Councillor Messina, which has now a couple of amendments that have been incorporated with the consent of the mover and seconder. So all those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors, and thanks once again also to those submitters from the community who joined us tonight. Councillors, we're going to take a very short break just so people can stretch their legs or go to the bathroom, and so our members of the public can do likewise. We will reconvene. It's precisely 8:05 at the moment. We will start at when the clock turns 8:10. So don't go far. See you shortly. Looks like it's you and I, Councillor Greco.
There you go.
Oh, and we've got the CEO with us too.
Mayor Rennie, how's that headset?
I suspect it's working much better from a point of view of the quality of sound everyone's getting.
Yep.
I'm going to have sore ears by the end of the meeting.
It is sounding a lot better.
Great. Ms. Wilkinson, I hope you're not expecting anyone to hear what you're saying because you're on mute and none of us can hear a word.
Yes, in fact, I was expecting someone to so what I was saying is, Mayor, the sound is eminently superior when you're on the headset. So, but if they're bothering you and if other councillors, we can go and buy high quality headphones and headsets so that you're not dealing with the $5 office work one, but something a little bit more comfortable. So, Councillor Greco, if you'd like a headset as well, it's no trouble. You're on mute, Gaetano.
Can I just
this is a delight for me because
you can
it
hear
puts us all on a level playing field.
Yeah, yeah.
In terms of hearing.
Yeah,
because
that's
I don't
good.
have to ask what was that again and crackling in the hall.
Stop.
Yeah.
But look, I really don't like these online meetings.
No.
Right at the outset, irrespective of my hearing issue.
Yeah.
Just bear in mind, everybody, that the live stream is still going and the conversation can be heard.
But that's okay. That's
I think the community and all of us would probably rather we were in the council chamber not dealing with COVID-19. I think we can say that with some confidence. Councillors, thank you for coming back. I've got 5 councillors, so we're going to start again. And we move straight to item 7.3 on the agenda, which is Darebin's response to support transport and business during COVID-19 amendment strategy. Councillors, I hope that you've recognised that this is largely a procedural item which results from an inconsistency that was picked up. So this is not new business. This is a procedural item relating to some inconsistencies that were identified and are being corrected by officers. So just mindful of the fact that we're at 8 o'clock and we've only dealt with 2 agenda items. But I'll bring on the relevant staff. I think it's Ms. Olivier to answer any questions that anyone has in relation to this agenda item. Are there any questions? Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, Mayor, I think it's only worthy for the officers if they can just briefly point out what those inconsistencies were. So like that we can have just deal with this matter fairly quickly.
Thanks, Councillor Greco. Ms. Olivier.
Sure. Through you, Mayor Rennie. The main effect of this is we had included on the list of the report we put to council on the 29th of June basically asked council to consider a range of things that could quickly help our community respond to COVID-19. So things like temporary cycle lanes and similar things. Actually, we have identified one thing on that list that was essentially not possible to do in a temporary way. So we're recommending that that comes off the list. And further, it was inconsistently dealt with in a couple of the appendices as well. So we're seeking to clarify that. We couldn't act on it based on the inconsistency between the two appendices. We think the simplest way is to take it off the list entirely. Council has a strong existing position already.
Thanks, Ms. Olivier. Councillor Lyons.
Just a quick question regarding the transport. In anywhere in this, do we deal with hand sanitisers at train stations?
Thanks, Councillor Lyons. Ms. Olivier.
No, that wasn't part of the original recommendation, and it's not something we've included here. This is seeking a clarification on one matter only.
Thank you. Councillor, are there any further questions? No. Councillor McCarthy, you have a motion?
Happy to move the officer's recommendation there.
Thanks. To a seconder for that. Councillor, I've got a couple of hands. Councillor Lyons, your second. Councillor McCarthy.
Thanks, Mayor. Look, in the interest of time, I'll keep it brief. We have a lot of other items on the agenda. I just would want to thank our officers for identifying and quickly clarifying our position, and particularly in relation to St George's Road, which is a complex section of Darebin. It has a lot of competing uses in terms of both the transport and amenity components, and as both the report and also the recommendation reference, trying to do anything that involves a fast track approach is inappropriate along St George's Road because of the complexity of the modes that exist there. And one of the things that council has taken a very strong position on is the importance of strong, inclusive and deep community consultation in relation to any of the rearrangements of that corridor. We know that there are safety issues. There have been long-standing safety issues along the corridor between cyclists, tram users, motorists, pedestrians, basically any form of transport except for trains. And you find that confluence there. We want to get the safest outcome. That involves, we believe, significant investment in signalisation along key points, and we've said that in the past. So one of the things that we would hope that the Minister would do in engaging with council in the future is actually fund a proper engaged process of consultation around how to get the best, safest outcomes, improve transport amenity for all residents, and not unfairly impact on local residents in terms of their ability to get around and do those basic things. So the report's pretty clear. It makes a very clear amendment to council's advocacy position, and in doing so moves us that step forward, and hopefully to get an audience with the respective ministers in relation to those other proposals which do allow fast tracking should the ministers be prepared to fund and back those initiatives. I'll end it there, Mayor, and I'm really pleased that the officers have made this amendment.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lyons.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, look, this is thank the officers for a very detailed report, and updating it and fine-tuning it. That's always helpful and worth going that extra little bit. And I think Councillor McCarthy has covered the matter in enough detail. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Lyons. Are there any further speakers? There are none, so we'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. That moves us straight along to item 7.4, selection of tenant for the affordable housing at 52 to 60 Town Hall Avenue. I think you'll all agree it's great that we're progressing this and it's come back to us for another decision. Got Ms. Olivier to answer any questions. Before we begin debate, councillors, are there any questions tonight? We've also got Ms. Jordan on the line to answer questions as well. Councillors, it doesn't look as though there are any questions, so I'll seek a motion from someone. Councillor Newton, thank you.
I'd like to move the officer's recommendation.
Thank you. And Councillor Lawrence, was that you indicating that you wish to second that? Yep, great. Moved by Councillor Newton and seconded by Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, there is a blank that needs to be filled in the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. So Councillor Newton, apologies to you also, Councillor Lawrence. I should have, that was an oversight on my part to call that before we had the blank filled in. So Councillor Newton.
Yeah, so the blank will be Housing Choices Australia, and we can bring the rest of the motion up later. But yeah, so this is really exciting.
So Councillor Newton, just before you start speaking, I'll just confirm that with Housing Choices Australia, Councillor Lawrence does still wish to second it with that detail. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Okay, Councillor Newton, over to you.
Great, thank you, Mayor Rennie. So this is really exciting. This is something we've been talking about for probably all of the time that I've been on council in some form or another. But this motion tonight, it gives us a group that wants to move forward with us with this affordable housing at Town Hall Avenue. So I really commend the officers' work on this. If you look at the report, you know that there's been a hell of a lot of work that our officers have gone into to get it to this stage. There's been a lot of consultation on this site. There's been different, you know, a lot of for, a lot of against, but I think we're really, really moving forward in the right way. So we've got a proposal now for a 5-storey building with 41 dwellings, and it's going to have a communal rooftop area as well. This is something where I think, especially under the pandemic times, it's more important than ever for community housing to be built and to have housing for some of our more vulnerable residents. So really, really pleased to put forward with this. I think it is worth mentioning that this doesn't mean that it'll definitely be built, because we still need to make sure that funding can happen. But I think what's been really good about the process so far is that we have found someone that wants to work with us on this project and get that 50-year lease and get this happening. So fingers crossed, it's full steam ahead, and really want to say thank you to both the officers for their work on this, the community, and also the provider that we're going to be working with. That's it.
Thank you, Councillor Newton. Councillor Lawrence. Just unmute yourself. Thanks.
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, I'm an Apple Mac kind of person coming from design, so this is a very foreign machine for me to click. Yes, it's good. This project dates back over 6 years ago, I believe, and was outlined as a test case for potential social inclusion, social housing within a renewal type project. And, you know, we do have central Preston and around the railway lines and the tram lines are marked for transitional change to greater densities. Some of those go from 3 stories through to 8 stories inside the junction, but a lot of them are around the 3-story mark and other those sorts of formats. So we still have a long way to go with private sector investment. It's been slowed down in terms of coming up our train lines and coming in. We've also got a long way to go in terms of developing the Preston Civic Centre. So, so I am supportive of this project. Housing Choices Australia are an excellent partner and have shown how in Mary Street, we know that there was a social housing project done over 6 years ago, 8 years ago, even more, that has been successful in providing housing for people on the waiting list, people with disabilities, but they're then still setting it in such a place and such a setting that it's not alienated from the people in the other streets in Preston there. So that's important that we have got a good partner. I do note, obviously, that there's extreme concerns about car parking in the precinct because
that's time.
But those we need to manage, and with the offset of 12 car spaces.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I really want to say a few words in regards to this. I think finally we actually moved from a position of advocacy to action in relation to affordable housing. In the time that I've been on council, we've used a lot of space and a lot of time to talk about affordable housing and affordable housing and affordable housing. This is where we actually been able to develop quite an innovative approach and an innovative proposal where council land is used for community housing. So it's great to see that we've actually advanced it to this point. I think that the location that we have selected is an appropriate location. It's right on our doorstep. So, and I think that in relation to these services that are going to be encircling the location, also the density that's been proposed is quite moderate. We're not looking at 12, 15, 20-story buildings. And also we were able to resolve, I believe, the parking issues that were in some way impacting on this particular project. So I think we've ticked quite a few boxes and to make this happen. And the only other point that I would make, which really disappoints me, is that here we are as a local government scratching around to see what land we have in order to make affordable housing occur, whilst the state government is selling public land to the private sector. Once you sell public land to the private sector, there's no return from that type of decision. And it's really unfortunate. On the one hand, we see the state government selling land to the public land, and here we are trying to find land in order to make these projects happen. But notwithstanding that, we're putting our, if you like, our money where our mouth is and making this project actually happening within the city of Derby. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? There are none, so I'll put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried. All those against? That motion is carried with Councillors Messina, Rennie, Greco, McCarthy, Newton, Lassurf and Lawrence voting in favour and Councillor Williams abstaining. Thank you, councillors. That brings us to item 7.5, which is the declaration of special charges Solar Saver residential batch. We'll get the officers on board, which is probably Ms. Olivier. Are there any questions? These are fairly common events on our council, which is terrific. So I'm not surprised there are no questions on that. Councillors, is there a motion? Councillor McCarthy, and that was an indication to second Councillor Lassurf, the officer recommendation, I'm assuming, Councillor McCarthy.
Great.
Thank you. So Councillor McCarthy, over to you.
Very, very quickly, Mayor, obviously the formal matter that we need to do, which is to declare the special rates for the 41 installations that we're proposing to approve tonight, which is equivalent to 189 kilowatts of new solar. This contributes to our ongoing and growing solar generation in the city. And I just would restate the fact that we have doubled solar in the city in this term, which is an extraordinary effort by our community with council support through Solar Saver program. And I particularly wanted just to point out as well that we've benefited well, I think, from leveraging the state government's Solar Victoria program as well to really support our residents to make advantage of that as well. So just wanting to highlight that and obviously reinforce that in relation to this particular element of the Solar Saver program, we obviously do everything we can to make sure that low-income households are front of the queue and that they are prioritised through that process. That's probably enough, Mayor. I'll just, in the interest of time, I'll wrap it up there. And thanks and congratulations to all the new Solar Saver households.
Thank you, Councillor McCarthy. Councillor Lassurf.
Look, I won't add anything further, thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'd like to speak in favour of this motion. Just briefly, it is only 40 or 50 houses, but it's important because this program really is one of the programs people ask me why you bother with local government. And the Solar Saver residential program has lifted this government area into one of the highest solar using precincts in the whole of the country. And I would say that the Solar Saver scheme has since inspired the state government. So it is really important project that we continue on even in this difficult phase. And a bit like our proposition of 4 level crossings with Moreland, which was submitted to the Shadow Minister for Transport, that ended up becoming a state government policy covering over 50 level crossings. So you really can make a difference at council level, and we are tackling transport, regional transport issues, and we're tackling the energy question and the question of renewables, which is a vital question in not just at council level, but all levels of government. So I congratulate everyone involved in it. It's sort of the child of Councillor McCarthy and Councillor Cetus, I believe, were the original champions of it, but it's very good to see it going through. I would only note just one thing, that we should really be looking at debt financing with such projects like this, because there is an income stream here, but that's something for another time.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers?
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, can I know I said I didn't have anything further to add, but I just had one thing that I wanted to raise, if I could.
It's slightly irregular, Councillor Lassurf, but okay.
I just wanted to mention that this report also gives an update on the Solar Saver bulk buy. As councillors know, that we've had to reduce the amount budgeted in the next year's budget, and we'll be prioritising low-income households, as Councillor McCarthy said. What we've also done is we've reached out to everyone else on the list who doesn't fall into that category, and reminded them that the offer of a bulk buy is available. And the officers have had fantastic results in that. There's been in contact with 500 households, and 100 households have taken up that offer. So that's a 20% uptake. So I think even though, you know, a lot of us were disappointed in terms of not being able to fully fund the solar savers as it has been over the last few years next year, we're still seeing a lot of households installing solar panels on their roofs with the assistance of council. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Are there any further speakers? There are none. I'll therefore put that to the vote. All those in favour? That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll now move to item 7.6, which is the Aged Care Regional Assessment Service. We'll get Ms McGrath on to answer any questions. So we'll start, councillors, and we've got Mr Hanna as well. Hi, Shadi. Good to see you. We'll start with any questions that councillors might have. Councillor Greco.
Yeah, look, my question is, I understand that this has been extended for 2 years. My question is that after the 2 years, what is expected to happen after that period in June 2022 from the information that we currently have?
Thank you.
Yeah, through you, Mayor Rennie, the report details that this extension came as a result of the COAG Health Council meeting, and so we've now got a 2-year extension, and we understand whatever forum that council will then take. I'm not sure COAG is still in existence, but it needs to be negotiated across the states and territories with the Commonwealth. So it's really subject to those further negotiations as to where it will land after 2 years.
Thank you, Ms McGrath. Councillors, are there any further questions? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, just through you to the officers. I understand this report relates to a specific part of the aged care sector, but I just wanted to know whether there's any noises coming from the federal government post-COVID, post the COVID virus, about service provision in the aged care sector and quality service provision, because of obviously the tragic things we've seen unfold overseas.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Ms McGrath.
Thank you for the question, and through you, Mayor Rennie, and this might take Shadi and I, it's a big question, an important one as well. Pre-COVID, the Royal Commission into aged care was already underway because of the, quite concerning standards of care in some residential care facilities. You overlay COVID on top of that, and I would imagine that the Royal Commission would be factoring in the impacts of COVID as part of that Royal Commission. So time will tell as to what that says, but I am imagining that the quality standards will be quite stringent coming out of that commission. But I just wondered, Mayor, if I might ask my colleague, Mr. Hanna, if he'd like to add any comments to that.
By all means, Mr. Hanna.
Through you, Mayor Rennie. So again, I think the Royal Commission is pointing towards the importance of focusing on services that reflect community expectations and delivering high quality and value for consumers and community in general. The Royal Commission has been in a bit of a recess during the early part of COVID. They're meeting again and reconsidering some of the findings. So whilst we were expecting to get the report in October, that's been delayed at this point in time. So potentially this could be. I guess there could be more time in terms of when this will be considered. Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Hanna. Are there any further questions? There are none. Is there a motion? Councillor Messina. And Councillor Messina, that's the officer recommendation on screen. Can you confirm that's what you wished? And the seconder, Councillor Greco. Thank you. So moved by Councillor Messina, seconded by Councillor Greco. Councillor Messina, over to you.
Thank you. Thank you to the officers for this report. I think the regional assessment service is a service that's contracted to council. Now, before that, council was contracted and under its auspices would receive bulk funding to deliver this particular service. So with the regional assessment service and the aged care system, this is for community care. It is not for residential out-of-home facilities. So I need to say that at the onset. So what this does is extend our contract term. Aged care is a navigation, it's a spider's web. Now, the regional assessment point is the first point where you call the My Aged Care hotline, and then the officer then decides and does its first initial assessment. From that initial assessment, it then ascertains whether you need to go to an aged care community service, aged care ACAS it's actually called, to undertake a further assessment whether you require a home care package for you to stay at home. This service is for initial assessment, and it is the first point of call of our community. Our community will, our officers will know community members. They will be alerted to them based on other services that the community might undertake or have in their own particular homes. So there is going to be that particular connection. In relation to the regional assessment officers, they are inundated with calls, and I want to welcome the extra 6,000 home care packages that have been released in the community made by the Minister's announcement last week. So this is funding to continue our contract, the first point of call for our community to pick up the phone and say, I need assistance with my accessibility at home, with my services at home. They will assess you over the phone, and based on that, they will ascertain whether you need council services or whether you need an ACAS assessment, which then gives you more services in the community. So I want to acknowledge that this is the first point of call for our community, and this is a must. And the 2-year extension, I don't know what's going to happen in 2 years. I will probably assume that it's going to be continued, because as our Asian community gets a little bit older in this time, there'll be more services that will be required. So I want to thank the regional assessment officers at council, because they are the first point of call, as I mentioned earlier, and they know our community, and they are sensitive to their cultural needs. They are sensitive to the needs that they need on an ongoing basis. So I want to say thank you to them. Shani, pass on the thank yous to their commitment to understanding the needs of our ageing community. I'm happy to extend the contract.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Councillor Greco.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie, and I thank Councillor Messina for moving and providing an explanation of what this service is about. As has been mentioned, what the motion is doing is extending the service for further 2 years. That is accepting the extension of that service, and council being bulk funded to do that. Also, as detailed in the report and the responses that we got from our officers, that the extension is partly due to the Royal Commission and its unfinished business, and also the implications of the COVID crisis that is before us and how that's affecting the aged community. And we've been delivering this service since 2016. Also, but we have a long history as a council that goes back a couple of decades of being probably the best council in Australia in terms of delivering aged care services. Also, it's noted that the state government accepts that there is a clear separation between our assessment arm in council and the delivery of service that we provide, and that we are objective in relation to providing assessments and then enabling our delivery team to compete with others in regards to providing services to our aged community. So we're talking about the early entry level needs, level 1 and level 2 in relation to this particular assessment service. The point that really needs to be made, I think, that the extension being provided to council shows that council are a safe pair of hands to continue on with this assessment service. And also, I think I believe it's a reflection that the trend to privatise and deregulate the aged care sector is just not working, and that's why the whole process has been halted, and it's been delivered into council hands. And that also, to me, shows why council still needs to stay in this space, even beyond 2022, when other decisions will be made. Thank you.
Sorry, councillors. I was just saying thank you, Councillor Greco. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. Yes, I'd just like to congratulate the officers on this report and on their continuing work for our most vulnerable parts of our community. I'd also note with great relief that the federal government has put in a 2-year extension. There's been a lot of anxiety about how deregulation would occur. And of course, both the Royal Commission and things that have happened during the COVID virus overseas in terms of residential care are an absolute disgrace, and shows what happens when we put money ahead of health. So this is good that we've got a breathing space, but I suppose it's just in a post-virus period, I think it shows the past council's insistence on well-paid employees, on well-paid service advisors, not just the assessment, but quality, trained staff, having the time to do quality contacts with people in their homes is really vital, and we really need to move past the mad deregulation. We don't want pig bats in aged care.
I think Mayor Rennie is frozen.
She is frozen.
Thank you, councillors. If we could just stand by for 30 seconds while the IT team look at that. I'm sure we'll have the Mayor back in just a moment. Madam Deputy Mayor, May I suggest, I've just had a message from the Mayor to say that her computer has suddenly started itself. May I suggest that it might be worthwhile just taking a 5-minute break?
Sure. Yep. So thank you, CEO. Councillors, we'll take a 5-minute break. So we're at 8:43 now, and we'll go through to 8:48. I think I have to, do I have to ask for a vote there?
No.
No. Okay. Just checking. All right. I think everyone's happy with a 5-minute break. So we'll take a 5-minute break now, and it's just turned over. So we'll come back at 8:49. Thanks, councillors.
Yeah, it's a similar problem that I had earlier where the computer just completely shuts down and restarts again. And it takes a few minutes to come back online.
Just a reminder, councillors, that we're still live streaming. So perhaps you'd like to turn off your screens and go on mute for a moment.
Thanks, Sue.
It's just, well, yeah, just hang around and then I'll give you the thumbs up. Councillors, I'm hoping that everyone's here.
Susan, we're just on a break till 8:48.
Okay, thank you. My computer decided that it had encountered problems and it was going to restart. So randomly.
Yep. So back at 8:48 or possibly 8:49.
Okay, excellent. Stand up. So I'm back with you. Thank you. I'm just. It's now hopefully closed down all my screens. Okay, councillors, let's start again. So we'll take the screen share down. I apologise for that, everyone. My computer decided it had encountered problems and was going to shut down and restart, which is exactly what it's done. Councillor Lawrence, you were just saying we didn't want a pink bat scenario, so I trust that you finished your 2 minutes. Thank you for that confirmation. So just to recap where we were at, we have heard from Councillor Messina, we've heard from Councillor Greco, and we've heard from Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers in relation to item 7.6 on the agenda? There are no further speakers, so I'll now put that to the vote. We've just got the motion there so that you can see. That's the motion, and so that members of the public can equally see what we're voting on. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. That motion is carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. We'll move straight on to item 7.7 on the agenda. We'll first ask Mr. Sagona is here to answer any questions. So Councillor Greco, did you have a question for Mr. Sagona?
Look, I just had a question really for you, Mayor Rennie. I was just wondering how we could deal with this matter. Is that we're dealing with 6 key policy issues, and there's quite a few amendments that go across the various policy issues. And I was just wondering, from an amendment perspective, given that we're only allowed to do 2 amendments in total, whether you would permit more amendments in relation to dealing with this in an effective and efficient manner.
Councillor Greco, I'm not inclined to allow more than 2 amendments, particularly because in many ways this is largely procedural, given that it was put out for public consultation having been debated at our last council meeting. There are no submissions from the community that have been received, and ordinarily the process tonight is to respond to submissions from the community. Let's first seek answers from any questions that people have for Mr. Sagona. I think that it's going to be a long and drawn out debate anyway, even with 2 amendments each, noting that some of your amendments may be reflected in amendments from colleagues, and so each councillor may indeed not need to put all of their amendments. So I'd ask you to be a bit judicious if an amendment has actually been proposed by a colleague or something close enough that it gives a sense of the debate, not to have that debate twice over. So I think that might help, because some of the amendments mirror each other and are very similar. I'll try and ensure that we can have the robust debate, but as I say, this was put out for public submissions. There are no submissions, and so ordinarily it should be fairly procedural, because there was an opportunity to respond to submissions. So councillors, to begin with, does anyone have any questions in relation to the item of Mr. Sagona? No, there are no questions. So is there a motion?
Mayor Rennie, if I just may again, would you at least permit one amendment per each policy area, so that it just makes it easier for councillors to digest what's actually being put forward to them?
Councillor Greco, let's see if we've got a mover and a seconder first. I'm going to contemplate how to do this in the smoothest possible way without us being here till midnight. So I think that, that is also important. So I'm going to hear from the mover and seconder. I'm going to have a little bit of a look at the amendments to see how we... So Councillor Lawrence, are you wanting to second the motion? Sorry, you're on mute. So if you want to speak, please unmute yourself before you raise your hand.
Sorry, I was going to move it with amendments, but it's already passed.
Well, it hasn't passed, but Councillor Lasserf has indicated that she wants to move the motion. Councillor Lasserf, can I confirm that that's the motion as drafted in the... okay, so I'll need a seconder, or I'll invite a seconder. Is there a seconder? Councillor McCarthy. So just to be clear, Councillor Lasserf has moved the officer's recommendation. Councillor McCarthy has seconded the officer's recommendation. I propose that we hear from Councillor Lasserf, hear from the seconder, and then we'll get to the issue of amendments. And I hope that you've all had an opportunity to look at each other's amendments. I think that will be very helpful to avoid any double up. So Councillor Lassurf, over to you.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. And as you suggested earlier, we debated these policies and put them out for public consultation on the 29th of June. And this covers off six different matters, as Councillor Greco mentioned. And these are really policies that relate to good governance and transparency in terms of the operation of council, so that we now comply with the new requirements of the Local Government Act 2020. We did not receive, unfortunately, we did not receive any public submissions during the consultation process. So officers have not recommended that we change any of the policies that as we put them out to consultation. In terms of the policies themselves, there is, I'll quickly just go through each of them. There is the councillor support and expenses policy. Council did already have a similar policy, and what has happened is that we updated that existing policy and brought it in line with best practice to ensure that we comply with the Act. There's the public transparency policy, and while we didn't have a policy that was of a similar name, I think that in terms of the practice of this council, I guess we have been operating under the similar principles, but it's really important, and it's really good now that we have those now written into a policy on how we deal with confidential matters and how we make our information accessible to the public. The Audit and Risk Committee Charter. So we obviously have had an audit committee for some time, always as per the Act. It has now been renamed the Audit and Risk Committee, and we've updated that charter in line with the requirements of the Act in consultation with the independent members of the Audit and Risk Committee. And this is really important in terms of monitoring the compliance of council against our own policies and procedures, and making sure that there's a continuous improvement in terms of the way that those operate. The CEO delegation review, so this is under the instrument of delegation. We haven't, as a council, raised the delegation to this financial delegation to the CEO for 15 years, and so there has been, I guess, some benchmarking across other councils, and it's proposed to lift that delegation from 500,000 to 1 million. And so I think that that's appropriate, given, I guess, the growing cost of contracts. And so that means that less and less contracts can be considered under delegation that might have been done so in the past. Delegated committees. Now we have two of those committees, the Planning Committee and the Hearing of Submissions Committee. So under the new Act, we need to adopt new instruments of delegation to those committees. So that is, I guess, really just making sure that those committees have the powers as suggested under the new Act. And finally, the governance rules. So this is, I guess, similar to the governance local law that we currently have. It outlines the procedures of our meetings, the election of the mayor, how we keep the meeting records, as well as disclosure of conflict of interest by staff. Just to close, we did a very comprehensive review of the local law recently, and I think obviously there hasn't been much change to that, but it's good that we've been able to incorporate all of those things into one overarching governance rules, and I'm out of time.
Sorry, Councillor Lassurf, I said time a couple of times, but I was on mute,
You're
which
mute.
is...
And I didn't realise because I was on my my notes.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Councillor McCarthy.
I'll reserve my right. Thanks, Mayor.
Thank you. Are there any further speakers? So Councillor Greco. Councillor Greco, you're on mute now.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I have an amendment that I have a couple of amendments. I have one amendment that I like to move, and that amendment relates to the councillor support and expense policy, relates to the public transparency policy, and it relates also to the planning charter. So it's quite a bit in there. So I was just wondering how we could deal with this, and Mayor Rennie.
So Councillor Greco, thank you for grouping those. I think grouping them is very sensible. particularly as they've been on public exhibition and haven't had any submissions received. So,
sorry, Mayor Rennie, is there something going on in the background? Because there's this weird noise.
There is. I'm sorry. If you just wait 1 minute, I'm just printing these, so I've got them in front of me, and that took a little bit longer than I expected and was a bit noisier. Apologies for that. So, Councillor Greco has sent these around this afternoon, so they have all been circulated. I'm hoping that people have had a chance to look at them. What I'm going to suggest is that we, and Councillor Greco, can I just confirm with you that in your second amendment, you will deal with those items that relate to the other, so you're dealing with the first 3 policy areas on this one, and you'll deal with the governance rules on your second amendment, is that correct?
That's correct, Mayor Rennie.
So, Councillor Greco, the way I propose to deal with these is that we will vote on the amendments to each policy area as a block of amendments. So we'll debate this once, and then you'll have your second amendment in relation to this. So we'll treat, for the purposes of the vote, the councillor support and expenses policy amendments as one vote, the public transparency policy amendments as one vote. And if we can go further down, Appendix C to the Planning Committee will deal with that as one vote. So effectively, one amendment, but 3 votes, which I don't think is great precedent, to be honest, but I'm trying to offer an opportunity for this to be robustly voted upon. So, and then the draft governance rules as one vote. So there'll be any change you're making to that policy, I would suggest, is going to be one vote. We're not going to divide it up further than that. And I'm offering that as an alternative to voting on the entirety as one. So,
Mayor Rennie, if I may, also, given I appreciate what you're trying to do, that if I could be given just a little bit more time so that I can at least give a bit more time to each section that we're dealing with here now.
So, Councillor Greco, as the mover of the amendment, you'll have 3 minutes. Given that this has been the subject of multiple briefings, given that it's already actually been the subject of a council vote, the same material that's in the motion that Councillor Lasserve has spoken to tonight has been voted on and endorsed by this council, and I believe endorsed by yourself only a matter of months ago. This is a procedural matter to comply with the Local Government Act. So I don't believe it needs more time. It's actually already been the subject of robust debate. It's now been the subject of 2 periods of consultation. So that's how we're going to proceed. And the first thing I'll do is check you've moved, therefore, an amendment, and I'll see if there's a seconder to your amendment. That's seconded by Councillor Lawrence. So, Councillor Greco, you've got 3 minutes. Just, Councillor Greco, make sure you're off mute, and then we won't start the clock until you're off mute.
Thank you, Councillor Rennie. I'll try to do justice to this, and it's not exactly just a procedural matter because there's quite a substantive matter in relation to the councillor support and expenses. And what I'm suggesting there is basically that we do away with the Merrill car. I think that it's just appropriate that we do away with that. And Darabin is a fairly small geographic area, and there's no reason why we need a Merrill car. And we can use alternative forms of transport, whether it's public transport, bicycles, or electric bicycles, and we can apply that. And I think it would be more in tune with our policy position in relation to transport. Also, I think it's important that we make available online immediately when our expenses, reimbursement and expenses, because I've noticed that it takes about 3 or 4 months before those things actually go online. In relation to public transparency policy, I think the policy needs to be reviewed every 12 months, not as suggested in 2022, to be in line with the other policies, and that council also receive a report on a fair and equitable process for an independent review of decision making by officers. We need basically an internal ombudsman type process, so when decisions are made, the community actually can get an arm's length decision review of decisions that are made by councils in order to satisfy residents that their issues are being clearly dealt with. In relation to the planning charter, because of the changes in the ward structure, we're only going to have one councillor per ward. So I think it's appropriate, a bit like Moreland Council, where we have one councillor calling in an application, because we no longer have 3 councillors per ward. So it'd be more appropriate to have one councillor calling in an application in future because of the new ward structure. And also the other thing that we need to do is that we need to provide submitters at least, and objectors and applicants, at least 3 minutes to put their case forward. 2 minutes is just not enough to actually for the community and applicants to put their case forward at a planning committee meeting. And I think we're going to get a bit of backlash when the community only realise that they only have 2 minutes to do that. And then thirdly, I think we also need to receive summary reports on how planning applications have been determined under delegation. It's information that we don't readily get, and it'll be good to actually get that type of information so that the community can see what applications have been decided by council in the planning committee and what applications have actually been decided by delegation, and that we make that information accessible and publicly available in a very easy, accessible way by getting those reports, both as councillors, and I would also go on further to say that information is also provided
That's
to the community at large.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. In some ways, we've made a rod for our own back with this motion, including 6 major policy areas in the one item. And so I understand we're in a COVID a virus situation, and a lot of democracy is being kind of sidestepped or stripped back. And there are learning problems with us. But the fact that there's zero consultation to me is a real warning bell about how we've engaged the community on these matters at a period of a second lockdown. And I just think that shows we're again getting caught up in our own bubble. Now, for myself, I've had rigorous debate against the last council and the last set of rules, and I've had debate against this as well. And some of the amendments put in here by Councillor Greco go away to giving back some power to our ratepayers and our residents. I don't think we should be fearful of them. And I'm not sure why this tendency to reduce speaking time, to reduce input, and to reduce accountability. It should be a very simple thing for us to give a report back to our community about the general trends in planning decisions that are made under delegation. That's not putting our officers on trial. That's just being open and transparent about what trends we're facing. Because, of course, we know the planning system has a number of players and pressures on it, but we should be open and transparent about the decisions and the amendments that get made within our realm, both our officers' realm and our councillors' realm.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers? Councillor Lassurf.
Sorry. Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I want to thank Councillor Greco for putting forward these amendments. And it is unfortunate that the current governance local law doesn't allow us to consider them. It makes us consider them in a certain way, because I do think that some of the points that he has raised actually have merit, and I am supportive of. I also am supportive of some of the comments that perhaps that these policies should have been considered individually, because I think that they are substantial pieces of policy that we are adopting. And it is unfortunate that because of that, it allows us to deal with these amendments in this way. Unfortunately, given the way that the amendment has been structured, I can't actually support any parts of the amendment because there are bits within each of them that I agree with, but other bits that I don't. And so I do agree, for example, that applicants and objectors should have more time at a planning committee meeting to put forward their case to the planning committee meeting. I do think that there is, sorry, I'm just trying to get the words of the amendment so I can speak to it. I do think that there is some merit in bringing forward the disclosure of councillor expenses, but I'm concerned about the administrative burden of real-time disclosure, but I think that it needs to be done in a more timely manner. I guess what I'm saying is here, I think that there are some merits to parts of it, but because of the way the amendment is structured, I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. Are there any further speakers? There are none, so we'll put those amendments to the vote. Now, just as I said before, because I do want to offer councillors an opportunity to separate these somewhat into different policies, we'll vote firstly on amendments to Part A, which is the councillor support and expenses policy, and so that is Parts A and B, which are in red. So all those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. We had councillors Greco, Williams and Lawrence voting in favour and councillors Rennie, McCarthy, Lassurf, Messina and Newton voting against. So we'll now move to vote on the amendments proposed to the public transparency policy. And so that's amendments A and B that are in red. We'll just get those on the screen to make absolutely sure that people can see. So councillors, Part B, we're now voting on those 2 points. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. We had councillors Greco, Williams and Lawrence voting in favour and councillors Rennie, McCarthy, Lassurf, Messina and Newton voting against. We'll now move to the amendments proposed for the Planning Committee Instrument of Delegation. So that's under Part E, point 6, and it's A, B and C in red. So I'll just make sure they're on the screen so that we're absolutely clear. So councillors, we're now voting on those amendments on the screen. All those in favour? And against? That motion, that vote is 4-4. I will use my casting vote against. That makes that amendment unsuccessful with councillors Greco, Williams, Messina and Lawrence voting in favour and councillors Rennie, Newton, McCarthy and Lassurf voting against. We'll now move to, no, that's those amendments. Thank you, Councillor Greco. It may well be, Councillor Greco, for example, with the question of 2 or 3 minutes, that if that appeared as an amendment by itself, it may well get support. So I'll just flag that that is, of course, a possibility should that come up again in the course of the debate this evening. So Councillor Greco, you had another amendment?
Yeah, Mary, just to clarify, can it come up for debate again, given that we've already considered it and voted against it? Apparently the rules say that we cannot you cannot put that similar motions until a 6 months expiry period is
Councillor Greco, you actually raise an excellent point. Sometimes if there's been one component, it has been possible. While we're debating your second amendment, I'll get some advice on that, should another councillor want to go down that path.
Why I mentioned that, Mayor Rennie, because I've been in those situations before where my motions have not been allowed because of that very ruling.
Okay, Councillor Greco, I'll seek some. I think on occasion the amendment being a subpart has been allowable, on others not. It might depend on the extent to which the amendment was key, or the percentage of the amendment that was actually about that issue in particular. So let me not tie myself in further knots. I'll seek some advice on that. Do you have a, should we go straight to your next amendment?
Yeah, look, I have another amendment, Mayor Rennie, and this is the amendment in relation to governance rules. So I move that amendment and seeking a seconder for that amendment.
Thank you. That's been seconded by Councillor Lawrence. Thank you, Councillor Greco. So this is points A to I. We'll just get those up on screen. So Councillor Greco, you're confident, I'm hoping, that that is the amendment that's on the screen?
Yeah, yes, Mayor Rennie. Yeah.
Great. You have 3 minutes.
Okay, again, I'll try to do justice to this in 3 minutes, which is a very important matter. Look, I'll just jump down to para 2.5 is our governance rules don't permit online meetings like we're doing here tonight. So we would need to actually do something in that space in order to make our meetings lawful under our own governance rules. Also, in relation to 6.2, there's an inconsistency in relation to 6.2D about aligning with council plan, because it's inconsistent with 6.2 and 2D. But I'll spend more time in relation to the remaining in regards to special meetings, as particularly in regards to submissions and questions at special meetings. It's not fair to say that we haven't had any feedback in relation to this. I believe that we've had quite some significant feedback from community members in regards to being able to ask questions or make submissions at special meetings. At the moment, our rules do not permit that, and we saw that happen with the draft budget, where people came to the meeting and wanted to make a submission or put forward a question, and they were not able to do that. So what these amendments actually do is actually enable that if we do call a special meeting for whatever subject it may be, that we enable the community to ask questions and make submissions in relation to a special meeting. And also, what it also does is that it also, when petitions are lodged, that we enable petitioners, and we give them the courtesy and the decency for a few minutes, 2 minutes, to actually make a statement in relation to the petition that they are putting forward before council, and that will be moved by a councillor. And I think that's only fair, given that the community go out of their way to make petitions, to come to council, and then to be completely cut off from the from our processes. So I think that's really important. The other thing too is that the governance rules don't actually allow, from my reading of them, for written submissions to be recorded in the minutes. Whilst the mayor does read them out, like reads out the questions, and the questions are recorded in the minutes, but the submissions are not recorded in the minutes. Those two-minute submissions that the community make, they are not recorded in the minutes. And I think, again, for openness, for transparency, and also for respect for the community that take all the time and attention to come and put forward a submission, that their submission should be noted in our minutes. Our meeting procedures do not allow for those factors to actually take place. And I think it's important that we do put those things in our governance rules, because it's paying respect to the community, and it's showing that we are listening to them, and not only are listening to them, but acknowledging what they are saying in our official documents.
Thank you, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence.
Take a deep breath.
Well done. You got a lot in there in your 3 minutes. Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, I'm supporting this motion because there's been community groups and community individuals who have raised questions about our planning and our meeting conduct, also our overuse of special meetings in this term of council. And generally what people are resenting is an erosion of democracy and a managerialism that is very well finessed in its tactical application, but continues to eradicate the community from the council conversation. And we need to remember that the council chamber, the council gallery, the whole council belongs to our ratepayers and our residents. It's not our personal or administrative domain or realm. It's the community's realm. It's the community's domain. And these are moderate proposals put by Councillor Greco to allow our community back in. And I was pretty shocked tonight when people said they couldn't recall 167 petitions tabled on the 15th of the 6th, and also the other petitions on the 29th of the 6th. That shows that we've got institutional blindness, and this very tape of this meeting is evidence of that. And
point of order.
Councillor Messina, what's the point of order?
Item number 53, 1H. His statements were misleading and false.
And what's the misleading and false statement? Can you repeat it?
Yes, he's implying that...
Not what he's implying. What was the statement?
The statement was that... Oh, God, of course, I don't remember what he said.
Institutional blindness was the word I said.
No, that wasn't it. It was about the submissions of his petitions, that he actually had lodged them prior. That's actually false. He has not lodged them prior because they're not distributed with the minutes, because I went in and had a look. So his statement is misleading and false.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. I think Councillor Lawrence is referring to previous submissions that he came to a meeting and attended just the beginning of a meeting to make to submit some submissions. You may recall at the last council meeting. So,
well, in that case, can I raise a point of order? Because I did say that I don't remember them because I wasn't at that meeting. So he's implying that I should remember them even though I wasn't there.
Okay, sorry.
So it's the same point of order.
Yeah, okay. Can I clarify? And I think this may help. Councillor Lawrence came to the beginning of the last council meeting in order to submit a number of petitions. I want to acknowledge that that did occur and that Councillor Lawrence took the time whilst on leave to come and present those submissions. So I don't want us to get tied up in points of order because we don't remember or because we weren't at a meeting. I want to acknowledge clearly that Councillor Lawrence came and presented those petitions at the beginning. When he refers to petitions, I believe that's what he's referring to. So on that basis and on this occasion, Councillor Messina, I'm not going to rule in favour of your point of order because I just wanted that to be clear. And so I suggest that we keep going. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. You've just got a short amount of time left.
Yeah, just so that we don't get bogged down in that.
Sorry, I think that I had a point of order and I don't think it's been dealt with because he has made a misleading and false statement against me because I was not at that meeting. So how could I know what happened?
Madam Mayor, I'm talking about institutional practice where things aren't visible to us.
Okay, sorry, stop. I don't want to, we don't get into a debate back and forth. Okay. Councillor Lawrence.
So I just...
stop. Please.
I'm just letting you know because you said he had a minute only left. He actually has 2 minutes left.
Councillor Williams, Councillor Lawrence has 2 minutes to speak and he's been speaking for a minute or so. So, and Councillor Williams, thank you, but it's not up to you to correct the time. Okay, I try and be fair. So the clock can go off for a second while I deal with the point of order. Okay. Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Surf has raised a point of order because by inference you suggested that she would be aware of petitions that she's not aware of because she wasn't there. Are you able to clarify that you are not referring in any way to Councillor Lawrence's knowledge of those? Can you clarify that, please?
Yes, I'm talking about institutional
so just problem. In relation, not in relation to any institutional problems. What I'm talking about is in relation to an assertion that councillors should be aware of something. If a councillor was not at the meeting, they cannot be aware of it. Do you acknowledge that?
Yes, I acknowledge that.
Thank you. Okay.
It's more our system of taking.
So thank you. That's just want to make that clear. So Thank you for that, councillors. Councillor Lawrence has acknowledged that a councillor who wasn't there is unable to be aware and therefore withdraws any suggestion to the otherwise. But I also remind councillors that Councillor Lawrence did come to a previous council meeting with the express purpose at the beginning of lodging those petitions. Councillor Lawrence, I'll put a minute on the clock.
Yeah, I'll just talk to Councillor Greco's positive suggestions, which I believe are allowing more time for the community to submit, and also giving petitioners the extension of a submission time, and so that then they can actually face to face with the decision makers the reasons they've done their petitions and where they put them. Now, at the moment, petitioners can go and ask at a public question time, but they don't have the public question time in special meetings. So creating a more an ability for community to give input to the petitions that they're sending to us to speak, I think is a welcome and a modest increase in our democratic practice.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Are there any further speakers on this amendment? Councillor Messina.
What I find is extraordinary during these amendments this evening is that the community have raised concerns, but where are they? You're claiming that there's all these concerns, yet there was not one submission of any of these changes. Where have they gone? Did they disappear? I'm totally confused.
Thank you, Councillor Messina. Are there further speakers? Councillor Lasserf.
The only point I would like to make, particularly around the public consultation and unfortunately not receiving any public submissions, which actually is quite disappointing, is that when we put the governance local law out for consultation back in April, I think it was April, it was earlier, it was within the last kind of 6 months, we actually didn't receive any. It was at the end of last year, December. So we actually didn't receive any submissions to that, and that was in a pre-COVID world. And I think that more needs to be done, yes, to bring our community along in terms of educating them about the importance of these documents and why we want their input into them. But I don't think that because we're in a COVID environment that's a real indication of why we didn't receive any consultation, feedback in the consultation process. It's, I guess, very dry material from time to time, but still really important. And I think that perhaps this is maybe a longer term project in terms of engaging our community on these policies. But I don't think that, the conclusion that's been reached by some others is as clear cut as one might think.
Thank you, Councillor Lasserf. Are there any further speakers? There are none, so we're going to put these amendments to the vote as one because they all relate to the same policy issue. So we'll get those up on the screen. So it's Part F, Draft Governance Rules, and points A to I. So all councillors are clear. All those in favour? And against? That amendment is lost. We have councillors Greco, Lawrence and Williams voting in favour, and councillors Rennie, Newton, McCarthy, Lasserf and Messina voting against. Thank you for those amendments, Councillor Greco. Councillor Lawrence and Councillor Williams, I know you've equally flagged some amendments. Would either of you care to raise your amendments now? Councillor Lawrence.
Yes, Mayor Rennie. I think I had 5 amendments I sent through regarding this item. And for the sake of time, I'm happy to deal with all of them in one amendment.
Sorry, I put myself on mute again. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. I'm just trying to make sure I've got the right paperwork with apologies. I don't want to get bogged down in the wrong one. And we've got those on the screen as well. I'm just trying to look in paper.
Mayor, it might help if I, page 16 and 17 of the collated amendments.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. That does indeed help.
Wilkinson.
I'm getting a bit lost in my paperwork, but I should be able to find it soon. Of course, I've got everything except page 14. Apologies, councillors, bear with me. Councillor Lawrence, I do apologise. So your amendment is on screen and you're happy for them to be dealt with as one amendment. Can I just confirm that's what you indicated?
I can only see two of them on the screen at the moment. Okay, yes.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lawrence, what I would suggest is that we do similarly to what we did with Councillor Greco's amendments, which is that we debate them as one amendment and then we vote, given there's three parts, Part A, Part D and Part F, that we vote on each part. So 3 votes, 1 amendment.
Yep, okay.
Great, okay, so we'll put the clock on. You've got 3 minutes, thank you.
Yes, okay, so I'll just, obviously I've had some missing of this debate. It was started in December and then we picked it up again in terms of processing these parts of policy. So firstly, in line with basic practice, which I believe is most of the councillors' equipments usually get reused by staff, is my experience. Some people, some councillors purchase it at the end of the terms for market values, which are, administered by officers. So I don't see any problem with that. It's not necessarily an option I like to do, but it's one.
Councillor Williams, Councillor Lawrence, I'm terribly sorry to interrupt, but it's been suggested to me that I may have forgotten to seek a seconder for this. So
yes, good point.
With enormous apologies. Thank you. I knew there would be a seconder, so Councillor Williams. Councillor Lawrence, keep going and I'll add an extra 30 seconds to the clock at the end.
Okay, so that's dealt with the actual expenses policy in terms of councillors reusing material equipment. In relation to the delegation, we have had a motion previously to consider a delegation in line with one of the councils, which is at the lower end of $700,000 for the CEO, and that was rejected. In this case, I'm suggesting $750,000, which lines up at the upper realm of the delegation ranges that exist at Yarra, City of Yarra, and the City of Moreland, which are, of course, cities that we very much have a lot of affinity with. In relation to the next 3 little items, again, I'm seeking that we have a little bit more accountability and that budgets aren't dealt with by special council meetings again. And that also, I'm really wondering why special meetings can't have 30 minutes of public question time. And my final 5th amendment regarding governance rules is really to address the problem that we've created tonight. And we've actually given a case study of lumping too many issues into for amendments. So that's where the source of excessive amendments come from, excessive items, issues in an item. And that, obviously, I understand we have a crowded agenda and there's an administrative need to do that. But one way to address that is that we actually have changed how amendments are done, and we instead change the onus and let councillors make up to 6 amendments in a succession, and that they can only make more with the leave of councillors in attendance at the meeting. And that sort of delivers more power back to the actual chamber, which is a chamber of debate and a chamber of discussion. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Lawrence. Councillor Williams.
Yes, in reference to the delegation for the CEO to upping from 500,000 to 750, I think the important part here is to obviously keep in line with our neighbouring municipalities, which their ones are obviously 500,000, which is Banyule, Hume 500, Moonee Valley's 500, and Moreland is 700, and Yarra 750. I think if we're doubling is quite a huge increase in doubling. We're going from 500 to $1 million. I believe that we need to do things on a very small scale. I don't like big jumps. It doesn't sit well with me, no matter whether it's a NARC swimming pool or obviously the CEO financial delegation. In reference to question time, I think it's great that we can allow extra question time for our community. I feel that they've been hard done by over the years in allowing them to constantly only having 1 or 2 questions. I think it's important that they feel they are part of this community, because I feel that we no longer have our committees, or majority of our committees have dissolved or have moved on. I think it's important that we allow our community to be part of this council. In reference to equipment, in the previous years, we tend to get new equipment every 3 years. We haven't this term. We've had them for the full 4 years. And in my previous times, when I've been on council, I've actually donated my equipment that I've purchased, including my a slat that I had that I gave to the Islamic school down in Tyler Street, which they were very appreciative. And a printer was given away to a family that really wanted a printer during their time, that had 3 or 4 kids that were struggling during doing their VCE subjects and Year 11 studies. So I was quite privileged to be able to feel that I could actually give that away.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. Are there any further speakers? There are no further speakers, so we'll put those matters to the vote. So councillors, as I stated, and in a similar way to what we did with the amendments proposed by Councillor Greco, we'll vote on these for each policy area. So in relation to part A, you can see that there. So that's the councillor support and expenses policy. All those in favour?
Sorry, can we have that up again? I can't see it. Sorry.
Sure. No, thank you, Councillor Messina. It's important that we're very familiar with what we're voting with. So this is the amendment that would enable councillors to purchase equipment at market values. Okay, so all those in favour? And against? That motion is tied. I will exercise my vote against as per the governance advice we had received on that matter. So that has councillors Greco, Lawrence, Williams and Messina voting in favour, and councillors Rennie, McCarthy, Newton and Lesurf voting against. In relation to the instrument of delegation, so this was part D. So we'll just get that on the screen so councillors can see clearly what they're voting on. So part D, those words in red, but with the CEO delegation of financial powers limited to $750,000. So all those in favour and against? That was carried. So that was councillors Greco, McCarthy, Newton, Williams, Messina, Lesurf and Lawrence voting in favour, and councillor Rennie voting against. Please, councillors, if I make a mistake when I'm calling out the names, don't hesitate to correct me. And in relation to the draft governance rules, so part F of Councillor Lawrence's amendment. You can see those changes here. So all those in favour? And against? Sorry, Councillor, yeah, that's right. Can I just do that again? Councillors, just keep your hands close to your head. I'm going to do the whole vote again to make sure I get that accurately. All those in favour? And against? That motion, that amendment is lost, that final one, with Councillors Greco, Williams and Lawrence voting in favour, and Councillors McCarthy, Rennie, Newton, Lassurf and Messina voting against. Thank you, Councillor Lawrence, for your amendments. Councillor Williams, yes.
I too also have an amendment that I put in.
Thank you. Let's go to that. So Councillor, and that's Councillor Lawrence, was that an indication to second that amendment? Thank you for that. Councillor Williams, I'll just note that Council has just voted in favour of Councillor Lawrence's amendment in relation to the CEO delegation. And so this council just voted for that to be 750,000, and you voted for that. In line with that, are you willing to drop that amendment to Part D?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we'll just eliminate the amendment to Part D. Thank you for that, Councillor Williams. And that means that your amendment is only to Part E, number 6. And that's been seconded by Councillor Lawrence.
Sorry, Mayor Rennie, as the mover, I would be happy to accept that amendment.
Okay, and thank you, Councillor Lassurf. I realise I'd overlooked that important question on previous ones. Councillor McCarthy, you were the seconder of the substantive motion. Would you also accept that amendment?
Just to be clear, the amendment is part...
That's subject to a planning application being called up by planning committee by 2 councillors. So at the moment...
Yeah, I'm happy to accept that as well.
Okay, thank you for that. So Councillor Williams, the mover and seconder have accepted your amendment. So that is now part of the substantive amendment. Thank you.
Yay.
So we'll return to the debate on the substantive amendment, and I believe we'd heard only from the
Sorry.
Pardon?
It's a motion, not an amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Lassurf. That is correct. Getting our emotions, I was going to say our amendments and our motions tied in knots and ending up with a lot of emotion. So, Councillor Lassurf, you'd spoken to the motion. I think I've lost my piece of paper where I had recorded this. Councillor McCarthy, just for my recollection, had you spoken to the motion or did you reserve your right?
I reserved my right.
That's what I thought. Okay. So, councillors, we're resuming debate, and Councillor Lawrence, over to you.
Yes, Mayor Rennie, thank you. Look, I'm wanting to speak in favour of this motion. Obviously, I've pointed out a number of amendments that have been rejected. Similar amendments, I have to say, were rejected by a previous council when I've tried to open up the processes here at Darebin. And I do that because I think Darebin is a special place, and it is a place where people can express their passion for issues, their passion for food, passion for place. And we have a bit of an open culture where people get things off their chest. And I think that we're underestimating our community if we don't allow them into the council processes. But given the acceptance of a couple of motions, most notably the provision for 2 councillors to call in the planning procedure, I have to support this motion because that is something that's been raised by data and by other people, that with the new 9-person council structure, just having the limitation of 3 people to bring an issue in could disenfranchise people in terms of having the planning committee fully examine issues that are important. Perhaps it'll only be important to 26,000 people. That is 2 wards. But they will be then still important. And I think, you know, we have had some criticism from this council of the 9 single member wards. I'm not going to repeat that, but I think if there is a concern about lack of